to me, besides creating an additional layer of something, a chief executive officer for activities, a CEO of sorts, to me it potentially usurps state authority, that meaning our state party leadership, those that assemble in a region that vote. You know, we do have a treasury in each of these regions. It's not much, but I'm not sure what this implies in terms of control over such things. I urge your opposition.
All right. Are there any other members who wish to speak in support? Mr. Little.
Madam Chairman, I'd like to offer an amendment to this to strike out the language dealing with chief executive officer and those activities, that it would end at where the presiding over the meetings.
All right. There has been a motion made to strike and shall serve as chief executive officers for any activities of the region, so that the inserted language would simply be the vice chairman shall preside at all meetings of their region, period. Is that correct?
Yes, Madam Chair.
All right. That has been moved. Is there a second? There is a second for Mr. Ryder of Tennessee. Any discussion? Mr. Little, would you like to speak to your amendment?
Is it possible that I could request the sponsor accept this as a friendly amendment?
There is really no such thing. We would have to take a vote on it regardless of her acceptance or rejection of it.
Thank you, Madam.
All right.
Madam Chair, I think it's self-explanatory.
Okay. Are there any other members who wish to speak to Mr. Little's amendment? Anyone who wishes to speak to Mr. Little's amendment? I see Mr. Ryder from Tennessee.
John Ryder, Tennessee. I think that's a great idea. I appreciate Mr. Little clarifying that. And, you know, one of the points is all of these people who serve as the vice chairman are volunteers, and you don't want to impose a lot of things on them that they have to do. You know, they serve at their own expense. So adding the other duties, if there were any other duties, if there were any activities, would be an undue burden on people who are serving their party and their country. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Ryder. Is there anyone who wishes to speak in opposition? Is there anyone who wishes to speak in opposition to Mr. Little's motion? I see two other gentlemen at the microphone. Mr. Evans. Well, I'm just trying to see which one of you decided to speak. Yes, Mr. Evans, you're recognized.
We were flipping a coin, and I lost. So, I rise to speak in support of the motion to amend and to note that it addresses the concerns that I have. I do think that it is important that our Southern Region Vice President or Vice Chairman have power, because we are the one region that insists that grits be served at each regional breakfast. And this is of critical importance to us. And we do not want anything that would undermine that ability to regulate the Southern region. And I think the rule as amended would preserve both. Thank you.
All right. Is there anyone else who wishes to speak to this amendment? Seeing none, we will move to the question. The motion has been made that we strike the language and shall serve as chief executive officers for any activities of the region. All of those in favor of striking this language, please say aye. Aye. All opposed, nay. The ayes have it. Now we move back to the main motion. The main motion would allow us to insert the language, the vice chairman shall preside at all meetings of their region, period. Is there anyone else who wishes to speak to this amendment? Seeing none, we'll move to a vote on the amendment. All those in favor of adopting this amendment, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? The amendment is passed as amended. Next, we will move to amendment number 5.5. This amendment deals with rule number 5B and has been submitted by the gentleman from Arizona. Please proceed for the purpose of a motion.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Bruce Ash, Arizona. This is not going to be controversial. And I'm very happy that Miriam has been our Western region chair for years. We also get grits in the Western region. I'm very happy with that because I get to continue my grits breakfast even if I'm here at the RNC meetings. All this would do was add the words vice chairman after the word co-chairman so that if adopted, the subsection would read, the chairman, co-chairman, and vice chairman and all other officers shall be elected in January of the odd number year. All this is cleanup to make sure that the regional officers are elected at that same January meeting.
All right. There has been a motion. Is there a second? There is a second. Mr. Ash, well, I would let you go out of order to make your point. My apologies. It was my mistake. So we have now had one person speak in favor of the motion. Is there anyone who would like to speak in opposition? Mr. Ryder.
Madam Chairman, John Ryder of Tennessee, and if you look at Rule 5A2, it says 8 vice chairmen who shall be elected at regional caucuses by the Republican National Committee, members of the 4 regions, and shall be residents, so on. The election shall take place in January of each odd-numbered year. So what would be the point of inserting this language again in Section 5B? I guess it's really an inquiry as much as it is a statement. But if there's no good reason to do it, why do we want to add words to the rules? So unless Mr. Ash could give us a good reason, I would say vote no on the proposed amendment.
All right. Mr. Ash, would you like to address that?
Madam Chairman, Bruce Ash, Arizona. That's a great point, Mr. Ryder, and I think we overlooked that, and I apologize for taking the time on the committee. It was merely to make sure that those officers were elected at the same time. We just missed it. Okay.
All right. Would you like to withdraw it? All right.
And I'd like to withdraw the motion at this time.
Thank you, Mr. Ash. The amendment is
basically, this just makes the proposed language consistent with the numbering of the number of officers of the RNC. So if we add an officer, even though I graduated from a college with a great football team, we can still add. And 29 plus 1 equals 30. So then we put 30 in. That solves the problem.
you have to get how many football players together to add that high, Mr.
Well, it depends on how many national championships you have.
Oh. All right. Okay, you have heard the motion and it has been seconded. Is there any further debate? All those in favor, please say aye. Any opposed, nay? All right, the motion passes. So now we are back to the main motion, which is to insert the following language: the chairman of the Standing Committee on Presidential Primary Debates, and further in the rule we have already amended to include 30 rather than 29. Is there anyone else who wishes to speak regarding this motion? Mr. Evans.
Yes.
I'm not going to try any more football jokes.
Well, first of all, my hat's off to Steve Dupree, who did a phenomenal job with our debates committee. For those who don't remember, when we were last up in 2012, it was just a disaster. We had, Candy Crowley, George Stephanopoulos asking questions that are out of left field that had nothing to do. And it became clear in our today's media world that debates are an integral part of the process. And being an integral part of the process, we took the advantages of Rule 12 to create a debate committee that permitted us to have a lot more control over the debates themselves, both in terms of the number, the location, and even, to some degree, the panelist. Many of you may remember that when MSNBC misbehaved, the reaction was swift, and the reaction was severe. And that illustrated to us just how important the debate committee had become in today's media world. And it seemed appropriate that the person in charge of that committee needed to report directly and as an officer on equal footing with other officers to make sure that the full complement of the executive committee of the RNC as well would get the benefit of exactly what was being done, why it was being done, and how it was being done. And the best way to do that would be to pass this amendment. So I rise in support of the amendment in recognition that we don't live in the 1900s anymore. We live in a new millennia, and in the new millennia, we have to deal with media and we have to deal with cable news and exercise that control through an officer who, in fact, is an officer of the RNC.
Thank you, Mr. Evans. Is there anyone who wishes to speak in opposition? Is there anyone who wishes to speak in opposition? Are there additional members who would like to speak in support? Mr. Little.
Oh, one thing Mr. Evans didn't mention is that the viewership of these debates was huge, and the effect on them was enormous. And certainly it's appropriate to put the chairman of this committee on the executive committee.
Thank you, Mr. Little. Is there any further debate on this motion? Seeing none, we will move directly to a vote. All of those in favor of inserting the language, the chairman of the Standing Committee on Presidential Primary Debates, along with changing numeral 29 to numeral 30 in the body of the rule, please say aye. Aye. Are there any opposed? The ayes have it. All right. As I understand it, there are no further amendments on Rule 6, and so we will move to Rule 7. Rule 7 deals with the rules of order. We have one amendment, Amendment 7.1, that impacts Rule 7B, that has been submitted by the lady from Maryland. Mrs. Ambrose.
Good afternoon, Nickley Ambrose, Maryland. Madam Chair, I am moving to reinsert the language which came out pretty recently from our documents. Essentially, I think, as you have very ably demonstrated today, it is a lovely benefit to have registered parliamentarians ready to assist at all meetings. It certainly aids with our credibility and our transparency to have that extra layer of attention. And I also firmly believe that RNC should be setting the gold standard for state and local GOP organizations and also for our auxiliaries, that we really do need to look to the guidance of registered parliamentarians. On a personal note, I have to say I used to be chairman of the Young Republican National Federation, and it was as you were, Madam Chair. And
in the dark ages, yes.
Oh, you're nonsense. It made a night and day difference when we moved to having that requirement of increasing our credibility and just the general operations of the organization in our general sessions. Thank you.
All right. There has been a motion. Is there a second? Second. All right. Is there anyone who wishes to speak in opposition to this motion? And it certainly won't be me today, as they're sitting right next to me. All right, Mr. Evans.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I recall when this particular issue came up and we had a lively debate, the real question was whether or not at every single general session we needed to have a registered parliamentarian with the accompanying expense that went with that. And what we discovered is that at virtually every meeting we had more people in the room that knew the parliamentary rules than most parliamentarians do. No offense to my colleagues on the stage, who I'm assuming are quite the best. And so the conclusion was that certainly the party makes available as a resource a registered parliamentarian, which at any time any committee or session can call upon. It's not necessary in every single session to have a registered parliamentarian available there to render on-the-spot opinions, because it is A, so infrequent, and B, because we have so many people on the committee that already know the rules so well. And so as a matter of just efficiency, we adopted this rule as both a matter of expense, but also a matter of convenience, of trying to make sure that we could keep our meetings moving when there are no real issues at play. And so I would urge a vote of no to the repeal, what it would be, which is the repeal of an amendment that had already been adopted by the Republican National Committee.
All right, thank you, Mr. Evans. Is there anyone else who would like to speak in support of the amendment? Support. Mr. Ashe.
Good morning, good afternoon, Madam Chairman. Bruce Ashe, Arizona. As somebody who has worked with the aid of parliamentarians chairing the Standing Committee on Rules, and being a knucklehead myself and having done stupid things from time to time, I found having a parliamentarian to be very helpful. I realize we're talking about general session. If this is a matter of expense, they're there already. I've utilized Mr. Gage, Mr. Hanshaw, and a number of other registered parliamentarians. Sharon Giese, who's been a member of the RNC for many years, served as a kind of an ex officio parliamentarian at the general sessions for many, many years. It does give us, as Nicolay pointed out, a greater sense of fairness and propriety. I don't believe that we've had much of a problem at general session, but there's no additional expense. It doesn't cost us anything to look like a more professional organization and be able to handle parliamentary inquiries when they do come up. I thank you for your consideration.
Thank you. Is there anyone who wishes to speak in opposition? Mr. Ryder.
John Ryder, Tennessee. Over the past 3 years, I've had the privilege of serving as general counsel for the Republican National Committee. And during those 3 years, the council's office has provided a registered parliamentarian at every general session. During those 3 years, I cannot recall but maybe 2 occasions
if we can expand the base of parliamentarians who are available, and the difference between registered and certified simply has to deal with the certifying authority. Mr. Gage could address that if you wish, but there's the American Institute of Parliamentarians and that.
All of those opposed, please raise your hand. I'm sorry, we're going to have to call for a standing.
It's for the benefit of the organization as a whole. And a parliamentarian is one of those. That's why we have parliamentarians required at our proceedings in the state of Idaho, at our central committee meetings, and why I think it's a great idea for us to ingrain that in the rule here. It is still the responsibility of the presiding officer to make a decision that is then subject to appeal by the group, but to have this advice of a professional is very important. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Semenko. Is there anyone who wishes to speak in opposition? In opposition. I'm going to get your state right before we do this. A gentleman from Massachusetts.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Vincent DeVito from Massachusetts. I rise in opposition to this particular amendment. It's based on my experience, having been involved in many of these meetings as well, that this particular language just simply reeks of overkill. A parliamentarian is not required at every single meeting. In fact, it could lend itself to a less cooperative meeting in terms of folks always turning to a parliamentarian to resolve any simple disagreement. But not all meetings do have contentious issues to be resolved. So a parliamentarian should be reserved for those that are chairing the meeting as their option. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone who wishes to speak in support of the motion? Yes, this gentleman.
Thank you, Madam Chair. David Asp from Minnesota. I'd like to offer an outsider's perspective on this. I understand that and believe that there are many issues that don't require a registered parliamentarian at these meetings, but as a matter of perception, for other Republicans who are not on the RNC, it is important for them to be able to have assurance that these matters are handled appropriately according to the rules of order. So I think as a matter of perception, it makes sense to adopt this amendment, and I plan to support it. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone else who wishes to speak in support of the amendment? Anyone else who wishes to speak in support of the amendment? Is there anyone who wishes to speak in opposition to the amendment?
I would like to speak in support of the amendment.
Oh, certainly, Mr. Blackwell. Please go ahead.
Morton Blackwell, Virginia. Fellow members of the committee, we have heard debate from, among others, two general counsels of the Republican National Committee. One of them says he doesn't think that this is necessary. Another distinguished former general counsel says he thinks it is necessary. It would seem to me that it would be the appropriate and prudent thing for us to have a rule that a general counsel could reasonably think is a good rule, and we have a former general counsel who says that he favors it. So therefore, the prudent thing for us to do is to provide this as a safeguard, since we know that there are distinguished people who are experts in these matters who think that it is a good idea. Let's be safe and vote yes.
Thank you, Mr. Blackwell. Is there anyone else who wishes to speak in opposition? Mr. Evans.
I offer a motion to amend, which I think will address actually Mr. Blackwell's concerns as well as some of the other concerns. As you all know, as we all know, not every meeting is a full-blown meeting.
Mr. Evans, we first need to have the amendment moved and seconded.
Absolutely. And so my proposed amendment is a registered parliamentarian available upon the request of the chair. So that what we would do is, if you're having a real meeting, no offense to those perfunctory meetings where we're simply ratifying delegates or we're ratifying something, and literally the meeting lasts a grand total of 7 minutes. Rather than requiring a parliamentarian for every single meeting, anytime a chair felt as though having a parliamentarian would be helpful or would add to the perception or anything else, that would certainly be in the discretion of the chair to do that. And I have great confidence in our chairs. We've had great chairs, including Mr. Nash, who fully appreciate the significance. So I would urge that we simply add to that upon the request of the chair. And if that request is made, then it's automatic and you have a parliamentarian.
All right, it has been moved and seconded that we insert after the word available upon the request of the chair. Is there anyone who would like to speak in opposition to this motion? Sir.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Jansen White, Vermont. Actually, it's neither. If I may, I just have a question for clarification to the presenter of the amendment.
Certainly.
Is that in order?
That is in order.
My question is with respect to being upon the request of the chair. I'm thinking of if you are in a meeting then without one available and then there is the request made, just procedurally, is that going to pose a difficulty? I mean, like, are they going to have to hold the meeting for a day to find one and bring them there? I'm just wondering, practically speaking, is this going to be a difficult fix?
All right. Mr. Evans, I'll let you respond to that directly.
Thank you so much. Well, as a practical matter, any chair, when they're going to have a full-blown meeting, is going to have a parliamentarian. What they don't want to do is have a parliamentarian whenever it's a perfunctory matter of ratification of a new member. It really doesn't involve any points of order. And so the way it gets solved is we have chairmen who have enormous knowledge and expertise. They're really talented. Most of them have been chairs before, and as a result, we are relying on the people who we have put our confidence in to know when they need a parliamentarian, and when they do, they ask for it in advance, and they're there.
All right. Is there anyone who would like to speak in opposition?
Yes. I would like to speak in opposition to the kind gentleman from Georgia, Nickley Ambrose from Maryland. Let's be clear. When we say all general sessions, we have 3 general sessions a year. We are looking to employ a registered parliamentarian for 1 to 2 hours 3 times a year. The RNC, as you can tell, has a phenomenal fundraising operation. We can afford 6 hours of a registered parliamentarian in the course of 1 year. Moreover, I cannot put a price tag on the value of our credibility and our integrity. Registered parliamentarians have to go through tremendous training. They have certification. They are unbiased. We are Republicans. We believe in rule of law. They are calling it like it is. So I'm happy for the Budget Committee to authorize 6 hours of a registered parliamentarian for our 3 general sessions a year. Thank you.
There's been a call for the question. We'll move directly to a vote on the previous question. All of those in favor of closing debate on this issue, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed, please say nay. The ayes have it. We will move directly to a vote on this amendment to the amendment. The current amendment to this amendment would insert the words, upon the request of the chair. All of those in favor of adopting this change, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed, say nay. Nay. The nays have it. Now we will move back to the main motion. The main motion, is there anyone else who wishes to speak to this motion? The gentleman from New Hampshire.
Steve Dupree from New Hampshire. With all due respect, and I understand the intent, I think the Republican National Committee in every one of its meetings that I have been the privilege of attending since 1992, our chairman has done a fine job. They put together a team, and I just think this is tremendous. While I understand the spirit of openness and everything else, I think we have a long history of doing it well, and that this is over-management of our chairman and completely unnecessary. Chairs who don't feel experienced in parliamentary procedure call on parliamentarians, but this is a complete overdoing, and it's unnecessary, and I hope we oppose this.
There's been a previous question called in the back. We will move to a vote on the previous question. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed say nay. We will move to a vote. All of those in favor of adoption of the amendment sponsored by the lady from Maryland, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed say nay. Nay. The nays clearly have it. I believe that that is the only amendment that we had on rule number 7.
Madam Chairman?
Yes, Mr. Little.
I guess I have a parliamentary inquiry. We've had a couple of instances of someone calls for the question, but it was my impression that the person should be recognized to call the question, not just shouting it out. I'd like to know how we're going to handle that.
Mr. Little, you are correct, and I stand corrected. And from now on, if you want to seek previous question, you need to approach the microphone and be recognized by the chair. Thank you for reminding me. All right, now we will move to Amendment 8.1. Pardon me. We have a gentleman who is seeking recognition.
I'm simply going to apologize for calling the question. Mike Stewart, West Virginia, and I will certainly recognize that moving forward.
Thank you. All right, Amendment 8.1 deals with Rule number 8. Rule number 8 deals with meetings of the Republican National Committee. So Rule number 8.1. Rule number 8.1 has been submitted by the lady from Maryland.
Good afternoon. Nicolai Ambrose from Maryland. Since we're on such a streak, okay, I'm proposing, based on my experience as an RNC committee member for the past 4 years, we have this incredibly weighty, fantastic honor that we are entrusted with. We have the rules that will hope...
Nicolai, I'm sorry. I'm reminded that you need to make a motion first and have it seconded.
My motion is that to add a new section under 8, Section C, any item for consideration at a meeting of the Republican National Committee shall be presented to the membership no less than 24 hours prior to a vote.
There's a motion. Is there a second? There is a second. Now, please proceed to make your argument.
So the reason for this is we are entrusted to alter, under the current rules, the rules we conduct ourselves by, affecting things like how we are nominating, hopefully, the next president of the United States. And there have been times, occasionally, everyone's very busy working, where our general session will start at 10 a.m., and we have had new rules that you can read almost for the first time at 10 a.m. on our chairs. And I would just suggest I'd like a little more time to review it, because we are the world superpower. This impacts a whole lot of stuff, and I think we should all have 24 hours of consideration before we consider altering our process as RNC committee members. Thank you.
All right. Is there anyone who wishes to speak in opposition to this motion?
Madam Chair, I do.
All right. We'll start over here with Mr. Dupree.
I'm Steve Dupree from New Hampshire. I rise in opposition for the same reasons on the previous matter. This is completely unnecessary. Sometimes there are votes and matters that come up that we couldn't honor that 24-hour rule. I think when we elect our chairman, we have to give them some wide latitude to do the best they can. So I rise in opposition to this motion.
Is there anyone else who wishes to speak in support of this proposal? Anyone else who wishes to speak in support? Is there anyone else who wishes to speak in opposition? Mr. Ryder.
John Ryder, Tennessee. I am opposed to this motion. As a practical matter, it would be impossible to implement given the schedule that we normally follow at RNC meetings. We usually have committee meetings the day before we have the general session, so that the report of the Rules Committee, the report of the Committee on Resolutions, the report of the Budget Committee, and other items that might require action at the general session are not completed until less than 24 hours prior to the general session. So it's an impractical rule, and I would urge the members to vote against the proposed amendment.
Is there anyone else who wishes to speak in support? Mr. Frias.
How you doing there? Steve Frias, Rhode Island. I don't usually speak, and I won't be speaking very much at these things, but when I do speak, I'll tell you why. Basically, this is my home state. We have these legislators who get together and they just pass everything at the last minute, and nobody has any notice of what's going on. And when I think we do a good job here at the RNC letting everybody know what's going on. But I see there's no real problem with letting people know ahead of time what they're going to vote on. Now, Mr. Ryder, General Counsel, says 24 hours is impractical. Okay, it's impractical. Then give me something that's practical. 12 hours? 14? Something. I see no problem with giving notice to people before they vote on something before the meeting. I don't see why we're so afraid of doing that. In my opinion, I'm always going to err on the side of transparency. And, you know, it's nothing about the chairman, our current chairman. We will have a different chairman someday. And when I make rules based on what could happen and based on what may happen. So, with that, thank you. Vote to give notice to the RNC members before they vote on something. There's nothing wrong with it. It won't hurt anybody. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Frias. Is there a member that wishes to speak in support, in opposition? Is there anyone who wishes to speak in opposition? Gentleman at this microphone.
Vincent DeVito, Massachusetts. I rise in opposition to this particular amendment. It's difficult to get into the minutia, try and anticipate every single action that's going to happen at a meeting preceding another meeting. So the folks that are running the preceding meeting need the flexibility to do what they have to do. They cannot be under artificial time constraints. So this motion, it's not only impractical, and also to respond to the prior gentleman that just spoke, it does not say no notice. So I'm in opposition to this.
All right, is there anyone who would like to speak in support? Is there anyone who would like to speak in support? This gentleman at the front microphone.
Yes, my name is Jim Crawford from Maryland. I'd like to make a motion that we amend this to a period from 24 hours to 12 hours. I think it's none of us, all of us have been in a meeting at some time or other when you get handed something instantly, you're supposed to vote on it without any real time to consider it. So we just changed it to 12 hours. Perhaps that would satisfy Mr. Ryder's concern. Thank you.
Okay, there's been a motion. Is there a second? There's been a motion and a second to change this from 24 hours to 12 hours. Is there anyone who would like to speak in opposition? Mr. Evans.
Yes. So I think maybe just be helpful to talk a little bit about how our RNC meetings work, because I think there are many who aren't on the RNC. It is the most open process you could possibly imagine. We have meetings constantly. We have a members-only breakfast where we talk about any issue that's going to come up. All of the various resolutions and rules meetings are open. The Rules Committee meets the Thursday before the Friday morning session. And as you can see just how long it took us this morning to get all of our ducks in a row on getting rules together, it's not the kind of thing that you can just snap your finger and make it happen. Now, fortunately, technology has enabled us to make sure that when folks come in on Friday morning, remember the RNC meeting starts typically at 10 a.m. When folks come in on Friday morning, there's a stack that's put right there in front of them, and they have the opportunity to take a look at them. There's only 168 of us, and we know each other. And so literally, if I have a question about resolutions, I'll go over to Carolyn, or if I've got a question about rules, I'll go over to Bruce. It's a very collegial, collaborative process. And so the idea that you would try to analogize this to the U.S. Congress, which is that you must vote for it before you receive it, we are a far different creature than that. We are a creature where we talk it to death. Everybody knows well in advance, and then you get a copy when you walk in long before you're asked to vote for it. And then on top of that, we now have these beautiful devices called iPhones and Androids, which permit us to then send it out as well. So all of that happens. Now, if we then impose an hour limit or a minute limit, all we've done is introduce a whole other layer of bureaucracy, which is the one thing that we need less of. We actually need more of what we do. We talk to each other. And we need less of what this is, which is rules saying you must do this by then. As long as everybody's comfortable, and I've never heard anyone say they were asked to vote at an RNC meeting on something that they were completely blindsided by. And the reason is because the meetings are so open. So I would urge opposition to both the motion to amend and the main motion.
All right. Is there anyone who would like to speak in support of the motion to amend? Mr. Ashe.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Bruce Ashe, Arizona. I'm speaking in support of the amendment because it is a reasonable variation on the original proposal. There seems to be some concern. Let me restate that. There seems to be some chatter that this is somehow tied to our current chairman. Our current chairman is doing a great job. The staff does a great job. They work hard. This is a member's chairman. We all recognize that. But I think those of you who have been around for a few years remember it wasn't always so. In fact, we had to pass a motion for a resolution for good governance. And it wasn't that long ago. It was 2012. When things weren't going so well, when things weren't being presented to members of the committee, and when things were happening that blindsided our members. This is not about the current chairman, because the current chairman may or may not be the chairman in the future. We need to protect the members of the RNC. This is a membership protection. And for my fellow members of the RNC who are here today, just think back about 2011 and think about the constant problems that we had with the chairman's office and getting the information and the tirades that we received. This is meant to be as good governance for our committee to keep us running the right way. And I am thankful that we have the great chairman that we've enjoyed now for almost 6 years. I want to make sure that all chairmen live up to that same standard. Thank you very much for your consideration.
Thank you. Is there anyone else who rises to speak in opposition? Mr. Dupree.
Madam Chair, Steve Dupree from New Hampshire, just as with the underlined fundamental motion, I don't think we need 12 hours or 24 hours. We elect our chairman. I urge everyone to vote no.
Is there anyone else who wishes to be heard? You have not moved to a microphone and gotten recognition. Mr. Hammond.
Madam Chair, John Hammond, National Committeeman from Indiana. I call for the previous question.
There has been a call for the previous question, and we will move directly to a vote. All of those in favor of closing debate on this amendment to the amendment, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed, nay. The ayes have it. We will now move to voting on this amendment. Please say aye. Aye. Anyone opposed, please say no. No. The noes have it. All right. Do we have an additional amendment on Rule 8? No, we do not have any additional amendments on Rule 8. We have no amendments that have been submitted on Rule 9, but this is the stack for Rule 10. So let's get to work. All right. The first amendment that we will consider is Amendment Number 10.1. Rule Number 10 deals with committee of the Republican National Committee. The chair will recognize Mr. Munisteri for the purpose of making a motion.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'd like to propose adding a new rule which would be labeled 10A11. The substance of that rule would be as follows. There shall be a temporary committee on the presidential nominating process to review the rules sources of the Republican National Committee shall be made available to fund the efforts of this committee. Madam Chairman, I would move the adoption of this as a new rule.
There is a motion. Is there a second? Second. Moved and seconded. Mr. Munisteri, would you like to address the merits of your amendment?
Yes, Madam Chair, I would. Thank you. For those of you that don't know me, I was the three-time elected chairman of the Texas Republican Party. During that time, I probably received more questions and comments and concerns from our grassroots members regarding the presidential nominating process, the timelines, how we pick our nominee, et cetera, than any other subject. Unfortunately, there has never been a consensus as to how to fix or improve the system. I would think that almost everybody here would agree that there are ways that we can improve the way what we pick our presidential nominee. But I think to get consensus, it's going to take a long time effort to get input from all the stakeholders, our grassroots, our elected officials, and give a great deal of thought and consideration to this. So my motion is designed to allow a process and a discussion to continue and proceed and hopefully reach recommendations so that we can improve our process in the future. I would point out that this commission does not have the power to adopt any changes. It's merely to get a discussion going so that hopefully it would culminate eventually in an improved process. Thank you for your time, Madam Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Munisteri. Is there anyone who would like to speak in opposition to this amendment? Anyone who would like to speak in opposition? Is there anyone else who would like to speak in support? All right. We will move immediately to a vote on the amendment. All of those in favor of adding the proposed language that you see in front of you on a temporary committee on the presidential nominating process, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? The ayes have it. Next, we will move to Amendment 10.2, Amendment 10.2, which impacts the language in Rule Number 10B. 10B. It has been submitted by the gentleman from Arizona, Mr. Ash. Mr. Ash, would you like to make a motion?
Good afternoon, Madam Chairman. Bruce Ash from Arizona. This would be to Rule 10B, page 20, line 22. It would add a new section that would just merely say, and I hope you'll consider this for cleanup, all members of the Standing Committee shall be members of the Republican National Committee.
All right, it's been moved. Is there a second? Second. It's been moved and seconded. Would you like to address the merits, Mr. Ash?
Sure, just very quickly. This is just clarifying language. It's probably self-evident, but doesn't hurt to be there.
All right. Is there anyone else who wishes to speak in opposition to the motion? Anyone who wishes to speak in opposition? Anyone else who wishes to speak in support? Seeing none, we'll move directly to a vote. All of those in favor of adopting the language in 10B to read, all members of the standing committees shall be members of the Republican National Committee, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? The ayes have it. Next, we move to Rule 10.3. Mr. Ash, I have this down as being submitted by Mr. Blackwell of Virginia.
You're right. Sorry. I got ahead of myself again. Pardon me.
That's all right. Is Mr. Blackwell here? Oh, here he comes. Chair recognizes Mr. Blackwell for the purpose of a motion. He's just coming back to the top of the seating area. Mr. Blackwell? Mr. Blackwell? I believe it is your turn to submit a motion. This is Amendment 10.3 to Rule Number 10A2 little II.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I apologize for not being at my seat when my amendment came up. The National Convention in 1992 passed this provision that allows members of the Republican National Committee, notwithstanding whatever action the Resolutions Committee might make, to make a resolution in order to be considered on the floor of the National Committee. The provision as written says that such a process requires the written support of one member from at least 10 states. That has been part of our rules since 1992. It has caused no serious problems. It has been a means by which grassroots people from 10 states who were members of the National Committee could, if they wished, make a matter in a resolution in order to be considered. The Standing Committee on Rules put this amendment into the rules, and so it is before us today, that would require 2 members of the National Committee from at least 10 states. That's doubling the number of members required, but it is orders of magnitude more difficult to obtain. This has been a very useful provision for conservatives over the years, and it has angered some people for that reason. It is not a good idea to produce this amendment, which is essentially a gag rule against grassroots members being able to bring a matter up for discussion. And there is no danger whatsoever that there will be some extended debate that would be embarrassing, because a resolution, once it becomes on for discussion, is always subject to a motion to table, which is not debatable, and a matter can be tabled. But it would be very wrong to make it virtually impossible for a grassroots resolution to come before the National Committee unless the Resolutions Committee approved it. So I strongly urge everyone to vote for this. It restores what has been the rule here since 1992, and it's a good rule, and we don't need to centralize power further in our national rules. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Blackwell. Is there someone who wishes to speak in opposition to the amendment? Mr. Feynman from Florida.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Peter Feynman, the state of Florida. Certainly, Mr. Blackwell overstates his case when he says this would amount to a gag rule. That kind of overheated rhetoric is certainly not necessary in this particular instance. Simply adding 1 extra person per state, which would be 2 out of the 3, and then only having 10 states out of the 50 to present a resolution is certainly not an unconstitutional burden or any kind of other burden in prohibiting a resolution to come before our body. We've done a lot of resolutions in my years here. They're all pretty good, and because they're all pretty good, they will all get support of 2 people from at least 10 states. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Feynman. Is there anyone who wishes to speak in support? Mr. Yu from Oregon.
Thank you. Solomon Yu from Oregon. I support Morton's resolution for one simple reason. It is a good governance resolution. Actually, I'm the only one on this committee used. If you remember, Chairman Steele spent $1 million of our line of credit for Tampa 2000 convention, and without supervision of RNC Executive Committee. I got 10 signatures and passed that resolution because Chairman controlled the RNC Resolution Committee. And that is a bypass resolution, a bypass procedure, and allow us to take this one directly to 168 members. With members' support, I led RNC executive efforts to investigate and report the results to the entire committee. For that reason, Chairman Steele could only get 45 votes for his re-election, and Reince Priebus got elected. So I am supporting this resolution for good governance purpose. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Yu. Is there anyone who wishes to speak in opposition? The gentlelady from Illinois.
Demetra DeMonte, National Committee Woman, Illinois. I would actually like to offer an amendment to Mr. Blackwell's amendment.
That's in order.
I understand what Mr. Blackwell is talking about.
Excuse me, Demetra, I need you to make the motion,
Yes,
and then we'll get a second, and then I'd love to have you speak to it.
Yes, my motion would be that we would ask that 1 member from 20 states would be the bar to be presented directly to the floor.
All right. Is there a second? Second. There is a second. All right. Now, if the lady would like to continue.
Thank you. Now, my reasoning for this, I understand what Mr. Blackwell and Mr. Yu are talking about. Getting 2 members from 10 states is truly difficult. Very, very difficult. We do represent the grassroots. Now, my recommendation would be to make the bar more difficult, and I do understand that. That is why my recommendation is one member from 20 states. That is a heck of a high bar, but if it's a truly good resolution, you will be able to get enough members to sign off on that. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone who'd like to speak in opposition to the amendment to the amendment?
Yes, Madam Chairman, Solomon, Oregon, I would like to speak in opposition.
Please proceed.
Again, I was the one trying to get those 10 signatures. It was very, very difficult. The reason is it's an election year. Chairman got absolute power. He can decide which state he's going to open victory office, how much money he's going to spend. You think when you have 20 states all want RNC money to open victory office and field staff members, and any member were there to stand up for a good governance resolution again? Answer is no. But I have no problem Chairman Priebus, the way he runs this committee. However, whatever we do, we need to think about institutionalize what we do. And not for this committee, not for this administration, for future committee. That also is a concept for the checks and balance within our committee. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone who would like to speak in support of the amendment to the amendment? Anyone who wishes to speak in support of the amendment to the amendment? Seeing no one else who wishes to speak, we will move forward to a vote. Mr. Ryder.
I wish to speak against the amendment to the amendment.
Well, I thought that's what I said, but perhaps...
I thought you said 4. I'm sorry, I may have misheard.
All right. My apologies.
John Ryder, Tennessee. I oppose the amendment to the amendment. In all of these matters, what we're dealing with, we've got a committee that is elected by region, not appointed by the chairman, not controlled by the chairman, elected by the regions of the RNC. And that committee is empowered to review the resolutions and report them out. So when you're talking about the procedure that's being debated here, it's a procedure that involves bypassing and defrocking the committee. And we simply don't need to do that. I oppose the amendment, and I oppose the amendment to the amendment, and I oppose the amendment.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Ryder. Is there anyone who wishes to speak in support of the amendment to the amendment? Is there anyone else who wishes to speak in opposition to the amendment to the amendment? Mr. Dupree.
Madam Chairman, Steve Dupree from New Hampshire. I rise in opposition to the amendment and to the underlying amendment. The current rules work fine.
All right. Is there anyone else who wishes to speak in support of the amendment to the amendment?
Yes.
Mr. Blackwell.
Madam Chairman. The previous speaker said that the current rules work fine. The fact of the matter is that what we are proposing here is not currently part of the rules of the Republican Party. So how can one say that the rule really works fine? The truth of the matter is this original proposal is a solution for something that no one will admit what the problem is. The real problem is that occasionally conservatives want to raise some issue on the floor of the National Committee, and the chairman and the Resolutions Committee won't pass it out. And if 10 members from 10 different states sign on to a resolution, it can come up. No one has identified what the real problem is. What damages has this rule that's been in there since 1992 done? The only damage is that occasionally conservative resolutions, or in the case of what Solomon you did, an important investigation into what was generally understood to be an abuse, was made possible. I oppose the amendment because 20 is way more than twice as difficult to get as 10, and my friend Ms. DeMonte, I think, is mistaken in this. I urge that the amendment be defeated, the amendment to my amendment, that my amendment be passed. This is fundamental for the representation of conservative principles on a national committee that is not always sympathetic with discussion of conservative issues. Thank you.
All right. Is there anyone else who wishes to speak in support of the amendment to the amendment? Anyone who wishes to speak in support of the amendment to the amendment? Anyone else who wishes to speak against the amendment to the amendment? Mr. Barber.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Henry Barber from Mississippi. I do oppose this amendment that would change this to 20 states. Couple points. One, there's 168 members of the RNC, so to get 20 people to do something is a very low threshold. One point, the gentleman from Virginia, Mr. Blackwell, talked about conservatives, and then he talked about the chairman as if he's not a conservative. And I just want to clarify that we know our chairman and all the members of the RNC are conservatives. We don't agree on every particular issue, but what we do agree on is that we want to win elections, and we want to win elections with conservatives. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Barber. Is there anyone else who wishes to speak regarding the amendment to the amendment? Yes, sir.
Vincent DeVito, Massachusetts. I'm rising against the amendment to the amendment, and I'm rising also against to the amendment. The reason is, it seems to me that regardless of everything that was said, there's also a procedural element afoot here, which is, as this has already been discussed in standing committee, this committee, and has been thoughtfully discussed, reasoned, and voted upon for a whole bunch of thoughts that we do not need to repeat today. But however, folks come to this committee for another bite at the apple. I would go, I'm against the amendment to the amendment, and I oppose the amendment.
Thank you. Is there anyone else who wishes to be recognized with respect to the amendment to the amendment? Seeing none, we will move to a vote. This first vote will be on the amendment to the amendment. The amendment to the amendment would replace the word "to" with "one," but insert "from 20 states." All of those in favor of adopting the amendment to the amendment, please say aye. All those opposed, please say nay. Nay. The nays have it. We are back to the main motion. Is there anyone else who wishes to speak in support of Mr. Blackwell's amendment? Mr. Semenko.
No previous question? Okay. Going for three in a row there. Madam Chair, Norm Semenko from Idaho. I support this amendment. And I'm afraid I just was dangerously close to hearing a moment ago that this convention committee on rules has no role in reviewing what the standing committee did. I hope I heard that wrong. But I traveled here. I spent my resources to be here. I'm representing the state of Idaho here, and I know a lot of other people are in that position. And we have the right and the obligation to review all of these rules. And if we think, as on this one, some of us, that the RNC Standing Committee got it wrong, that they're raising the bar too high, that they're making it too difficult, and that's the word I heard a little while ago, we do want to make this more difficult, that we have the opportunity to argue the other way. And we started this proceeding by hearing about the rights of the minority to be heard, but the majority to make a decision. That's what this rule is about. Thank you.
Is there anyone else who wishes to speak to the amendment? The lady from the District of Columbia.
Would it be in order if I called the previous question? Jill Homan from Washington, D.C.
It would be in order, Mrs. Homan.
Thank you.
All right. Previous question has been called. We will now vote on closing debate on the Blackwell Amendment. All of those in favor of closing debate, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed, nay.
Nay.
The ayes have it.
Madam Chairwoman, can I do a point of order?
Yes,
point
sir.
of information. The previous question was just called.
Name and state,
I'm
please.
sorry, Guy Short, Colorado. The previous question was just called. You had two individuals at the mic standing before the gentlelady from D.C. walked up. They were clearly in line. She walked up. She was recognized first. Is there any type of order, or how is that going to be run so that folks who are standing at the mic before others who get up here have a chance to speak?
Well, I did not know for what purpose the gentlelady arose. I thought she was intending to speak on the amendment, but she does have the right to move for previous question once I have recognized her. I will try to do my best to make certain that everyone gets a chance to be heard, but if a member is recognized, and I don't always know why they're standing, and they make previous question, that will be in order.
Right, and I understand that the gentlelady from Iowa was standing, and so was the gentleman from Arizona, and they were standing for a while, and certainly she has every right to stand and call the previous question, but she just immediately rose. So if there can be any equity of folks who have been standing for a while and wish to address it, that would be appreciated.
I will try to do that.
Thank you very much.
All right. All right. We now will vote on the amendment. All of those in favor of adopting the Blackwell Amendment to replace the number 2 with the number 1, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? No. The chair is in doubt, and we will move to a standing vote because that hand thing did absolutely nothing to clarify the situation. All of those in favor of adopting Mr. Blackwell's amendment, please stand. And I will ask the staff to count. Thank you. You may be seated. All those opposed, please stand. Be seated. The vote tally is as follows. Those in favor, 44. Those against, 63. The motion fails. Next, we will move to Amendment 10.4. Amendment 10.4 that has been submitted by the gentlelady from Maryland, Ms. Ambrose.
Good afternoon, Nicolette Ambrose from Maryland. I am proposing language under 10A8. There shall be a state chairman's advisory committee composed of the state chairman of each of the states, the chair of which shall be elected annually by its members from among its members at each Republican National Committee winter meeting.
All right, there has been a motion. Is there a second? Second. It's been moved and seconded. Please proceed, Ms. Ambrose.
So essentially, we are just changing words from this being an appointment to having it be the chairman of the state chairs is elected from amongst that group. I'm really pulling this out of the playbook of an organization that I mentioned before. I used to be chairman of the Young Republican National Federation. We had a very similar structure, a state chairman's association, and this was just a phenomenal leadership development tool. It was a great way for people to prove they could interact and lead at the national level, not just at their states, and I'm all for anything that helps develop leadership so we might know who to look at when we're considering future chairmen. And it gives a nice opportunity for people to rotate as there's a new election every single year. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Ambrose, I think your experience in the Young Republicans must have been a little different from mine. I'm not sure I would always use this as the gold standard by which to run the organization. Former Young Republicans are laughing at the moment. I'm sorry. It's nothing about the merits of your particular item. I simply don't think we'd use the Young Republicans as the gold standard. All right. Is there anyone who would like to speak in opposition to this amendment? Mr. Evans.
Madam Chair, thank you so much. I rise in opposition. I urge my colleagues to vote no. And the reason is because part of the success that we've experienced has been the very change that this resolution or this rules change seeks to undo, which is to permit a chair with the full access of all of the resources and the strengths and the weaknesses of every state, taking into account what they can and can't achieve, and then fitting the person to the job, because CEOs and presidents and chairmen's job it is to fill out a team that can work together. So, you know, I have to go back to college football. We don't elect a quarterback. We don't elect a right offensive lineman. We don't elect any of those. We allow the coach, the manager of the team, to put the team together, recognizing the strengths and the weaknesses to put together a winning team. And I think I echo what Mr. Dupuis said, which is I don't think we've ever had a chairman who has been so adept in actually taking the various talents and molding them into a team capable of winning, rather than a team put together by popularity or by election or by whatever. And we don't want to change that because we want to continue to win. We've been winning. We want to continue to win. And so there's no reason to change the rules that are helping us win the way we're winning now. So I urge everyone to vote no.
Thank you, Mr. Evans. I'm getting tempted to start using quilting analogies, but I will refrain since I don't think everybody would know what they mean. All right. Is there anyone who would like to speak in support of this amendment?
No, I'm speaking in opposition to the amendment.
All right. Is there any? We've just had someone who spoke in opposition. Is there someone who'd like to speak in support? Yes.
Sorry. Gwen Bowen, Louisiana. I just heard the gentleman say we had a winning team with our with this. Well, the last two times we didn't win, so perhaps we need a little more variety. And so I would encourage everyone to consider that before you vote. And I am in support of this amendment. Thank you.
Thank you. The lady here, you wanted to rise?
My name is Eileen Grossman. I represent Rhode Island, and it's an honor and a privilege to serve with you all. I don't know a thing about football, and I was never a young Republican. But let me just say, the way Rhode Island operates, it appears that when we have the chair and his committee, and then we have the chairman's caucus, and this is exactly, I believe, what she's presenting. They did not work together. They have never worked together. And it just seems that it's a power struggle. It really turns out to be a power struggle. So I would urge everyone to vote no.
Thank you. Is there anyone who would like to speak in support?
I would, Madam Chairman.
Mr. Ashe.
Bruce Ashe from Arizona. This isn't a football team. It is a political organization. And as such, we have state chairmen around the country who have, this is the cream of the crop. They've been voted by their peers, by party leaders in their various states. We have many, many great state chairmen, and we see it by the results in all the various states where they are red states. I have no qualms with the way that this committee has been run in the past, but I'd personally like to see men and women within that organization create their own leadership, one that comes from them, a leader that inspires the others, and not one that's imposed upon the group. The leadership that we've had has been very good. I'd like to try something different. I don't think it's a dangerous experiment, and it will only, I think, inspire more activity within this group if it is a leader that comes from amongst that group. Thank you very much for your consideration.
Thank you, Mr. Ash. Is there anyone else who'd like to rise in opposition? Is there anyone else who'd like to rise in opposition? Is there anyone else who would like to rise in support?
Yes, Madam Chair.
Yes, sir.
This is Jim Crawford from
No, ma'am, have you been trying to seek recognition? I'm sorry, you've been there so long, I thought you were stretching. No. I apologize, and I'm happy to recognize you, and then I will go to you, sir.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm Marlis Patma from Iowa. This is the last election cycle. The one thing we have seen is the people want their power back. And that has just been a theme throughout the entire election cycle. Our presumptive nominee has brought that out. The people want their power back. And I think it only behooves us here at the RNC to empower those people who are closest to the grassroots. And when you're electing your chairman, you elect your Central Committee members, they elect their chairman, that's from the grassroots. And to allow those individuals who were elected by their grassroots to pick the person they want to lead them gives great credibility to the new leader. It makes them feel a buy-in to the new leader. I don't understand why we wouldn't want to bring the power as close to the people as we can. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And let me just say, so we don't have this situation again, you were being so polite and standing about 4 or 5 feet back from the microphone that I didn't think you were seeking recognition. So if you would like to be recognized, let me invite you to step right up to the microphone as close as this gentleman is. Otherwise, I may think you're resting your back. All right? All right. I said I would recognize this gentleman next, and then we'll go to Mr. Hammond.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Jim Crawford from Maryland. And this seems like a good idea. And I just wanted to remind as a professional sports official, I want to remind the gentleman from Georgia that the coach is hired, but the team elects its own captain.
Mr. Hammond.
Madam Chair, John Hammond from Indiana. Very sympathetic to the notion that the grassroots voices need to be heard, and we can talk through that quite a bit. We'll have an opportunity to talk through that even more throughout the rest of this day and probably tomorrow. But I don't see this amendment really to be the place where that discussion should be had at the moment. And here's why. I would oppose the amendment. The state chairman's advisory committee is for the CEO, that is our national chair, to use for advice. And in any organization, we've got to have some verticality in that, in choosing leadership in that team that Mr. Evans spoke about. And I really think that this is an entity that's there to provide counsel. If for some reason state chairs want to do their own thing on their own, they can do that. The grassroots, anyone can organize in this country any way they want and associate anyhow they want. In this case, this will tend to weaken the chair's role, and it will not address the concerns related.
I will keep trying to make certain, but if someone stands at the microphone and he had been there for some time, he has every right to make a motion for previous question.
Madam Chairman, I would suggest that you requested recognition for the purpose of speaking for or against, but not for the purpose of making a previous.
Now, the gentleman was recognized in accordance with the rules and has every right to move for previous question. All right, we will move to a vote on ending debate. All of those in favor of ending debate, please say aye. Aye. Those opposed? Clearly, the ayes have it. We will now move directly to a vote on the amendment. All of those in favor of adopting the amendment that reads that there shall be a state chairman's advisory committee composed of the state chairman of each of the states the chairman of which shall be elected annually by its members from among its members at each Republican National Committee winter meeting. All in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed say nay. Nay. The nays have it. Next, we will move to amendment number 10.5, impacting rule number 10C. It has been submitted by Mr. Ashe.
Good afternoon, Madam Chairman. Bruce Ashe from the state of Arizona. Again, just a cleanup and perhaps...
Excuse me, Mr. Ashe, I need you to make the motion, and we'll get a second.
Right on. This is to Rule 10C, page 20, lines 4 and 5. And it would strike the words "with approval of the Republican National Committee" and insert "with a vote of the majority of the members of the Republican National Committee," and striking the words "and assistance." Again, I think just cleanup and clarifying what the rule was intended to be. This is a rule we didn't get to on standing committee. Thanks for your consideration.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Ashe. Is there anyone who would like to speak in opposition to this amendment? Excuse me, Mr. Yu? Okay. Yes, we had a motion and a second. Is there anyone who would like to speak in opposition? Mr. Ryder from 10C.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I oppose this amendment, and I urge a no vote on it. This is a further attempt to curb the powers of the chair, who may need the ability to appoint temporary committees. There is already a rule in the rules of the Republican Party that requires that the composition of any such committee at least be half drawn from the RNC. I think we have adequate protections there, and I urge a no vote.
All right. Is there anyone else who would like to speak in favor of the amendment? Is there anyone else who would like to speak in opposition to the amendment? Seeing none, we'll proceed to a vote. All of those in favor of the amendment, please say aye. Aye. All those opposed, nay. Nay. The nays have it. Next, we will move to amendment number 10.6. Amendment 10.6 impacts the language of rule number 10A5 and has been submitted by the gentleman from Oregon. Mr. Yu, you are recognized for the purpose of making a motion.
Thank you. National Committeeman for Oregon, and I move to delete the period at the end of the sentence after the word convention and insert the following: on behalf of and under the supervision, direction, and control of the Republican National Committee.
All right, Mr. Yu has made his motion. Is there a second? Is there a second? I see a second. Mr. Yu, would you like to address your motion?
Certainly. Thank you. This is, again, a good governance proposal, and to put checks and balance within our system. If you remember, I shared with you Chairman Steele spent $1 million our line credit and put RNC $26 million in debt. And Chairman Priebus shared that with you during the orientation yesterday. And that was the main reason that happened during my investigation was very, very clear. There is no supervision from RNC Executive Committee. There is no supervision from 168 RNC members. So for good governance and transparency, and I urge you support this amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Yu. Is there anyone who would like to speak in opposition to this amendment? Mr. Ryder.
Madam Chairman, John Ryder, Tennessee. This amendment is unnecessary, redundant, and superfluous. Rule 10F already provides all committees appointed or elected pursuant to any of these rules, whether separately incorporated and whether a separate reporting entity, shall be under the supervision, direction, and control of the Republican National Committee and its officers and staff, and shall be subject to and comply with the rules, policies, and procedures of the Republican National Committee, including its budgetary review and approval process, financial controls, legal compliance and review process, and employee policies and manual. That language was added to deal with the concerns that Mr. Yu has expressed. His amendment is unnecessary, superfluous, and redundant. I urge that you vote no on the Yu amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Ryder. Is there anyone else who would like to speak in favor of the Yu amendment? Anyone else to speak in favor of the Yu amendment? Is there anyone who would like to speak in opposition to the Yu amendment? Gentleman from Massachusetts.
Tom Brady, Massachusetts. I couldn't resist the football.
I must need your glasses.
Vincent, thank you. Vincent DeVito, Massachusetts. I rise in opposition to this amendment. It is clearly redundant, unnecessary, and bureaucratic.
Thank you. I didn't mean to say you looked worse than Tom Brady, just different. All right. All right. Is there anyone else who wishes to seek recognition to speak regarding this amendment? Seeing no one, we will move to a vote. All of those in favor of adopting Mr. Yu's amendment, please say aye. Aye. Anyone opposed? Nay. The nays have it. Next, we will move to amendment number 10.7. Number 10.7. This amendment impacts the language of Rule 10A3 and has been submitted by the gentleman from Idaho, who is hereby recognized for the purpose of a motion.
Madam Chair, Norm Semenko from Idaho. After submitting this particular amendment and reviewing it further, I've identified a drafting error, so I would like at this time to move to table consideration of Amendment 10.7 to a time certain, that time being after conclusion of consideration of Rules 1 through 12.
All right, the gentleman is in order. The parliamentarian tells me that you may wish to make your motion one to postpone. We will assume that that's the correct verbiage.
Thank you.
Yes. Is there a second? Is there a second? All those in favor, please say aye. Any opposed, nay. We will take up, the ayes have it, and we'll take this up at the end of Rules 1 through 12. All right, the next one that we will bring up is Rule 10.8. Rule 10.8, impacting Rule number 10A2. It has been submitted by the gentleman from Idaho, who's recognized for the purpose of an amendment.
Madam Chair, Norm Semenko from Idaho. I would like to move that Rule 10A2 be amended by striking the word chairman and inserting the word member after the words, quote, region and a, unquote, and striking the words, quote, of the Republican National Committee, unquote, after the words, quote, among the members of the, and inserting the sentence, quote, the chairman of the Standing Committee on Resolutions shall be elected by its members from among the members thereof, unquote, and insert the sentence, quote, the election of the Standing Committee on Resolutions shall take place at the quadrennial winter meeting of the Republican National Committee, unquote.
All right, it's been moved. Has it been seconded? Is there a second? Is there a second? It has been moved and seconded. Mr. Semenko, would you like to address the merits, please?
Yes, Madam Chair, as those that are familiar with the rules will no doubt note, this proposed change to the Resolutions Committee subsection of this rule would comport it to be consistent with the Standing Committee on Rules under A1, where the chairman of the Standing Committee on Rules shall be elected by the committee from amongst its members. This would make the Resolutions Committee consistent with the Rules Committee in terms of the election of the chairman. And that is the purpose for the amendment. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Semenko. Is there anyone who wishes to speak in opposition? Are you rising in opposition, Mr. Little?
Yes, Madam Chair.
Mr. Little, you are recognized.
Madam Chairman, I believe the Resolutions Committee is fundamentally different from the Rules Committee and should be appointed by the chair. We have resolutions that actually are out there every day. And at the end of every meeting, they will affect the position of the Republican National Committee. Whereas the Committee on Rules does not report except once every 4 years. So this deals with our positions on the issues of the day in and day out. We have a chairman of the Republican National Committee. We rise and fall on our chairman, and I believe our chairman should have the ability to appoint the chairman of the Resolutions Committee.
Thank you, Mr. Little. Is there anyone else who rises to support the amendment? Anyone else who wishes to rise in support of the amendment? Anyone who wishes to speak in opposition to the amendment? Mr. Evans.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I will try to avoid all references to college football. I can recognize the sensitivity being from the Southeastern Conference by the rest of the group.
You may not have helped yourself just now, Mr. Evans.
But I do agree with Mr. Little, which is that we are trying to put together a team, and we do have a leader, and that leader is the chairman. And the chairman does need to have the discretion to help pick the team that helps win. This isn't just a political exercise where we all get together and exchange ideas. In the end, we want to win elections. And Chairman Priebus helped us do exceptionally well in the last election. And I think we will do exceptionally well in the coming election when we elect President Trump. But for right now, the key for us all is to make sure that we don't interfere with the ability to put those very effective teams in place, drawing upon the strengths of everybody to build a unit that is capable of winning as opposed to just a group of outstanding individuals.
Thank you. Is there anyone else who would like to rise in support of the amendment? Ms. Ambrose.
Nicolay Ambrose, Maryland. I would really like us all to consider how important it is for the RNC to not be one person. It's fantastic we have a great chairman, but this is about a 168-member body that's supposed to carry on the work of the convention body in the 4 years in between. And last I saw, we were Republicans who believe in individual rights and our own freedom and liberty. So I would just encourage us all to think and respect the fact that we need to have a few more people empowered to make decisions, to have the ability to at least vote for the person who's leading your committee. Just a concept. I encourage you all to think about that. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone else who rises in opposition? Mr. Dupree.
Madam Chairman, Steve Dupree from New Hampshire. Ross Little said it best. This is fundamentally different from the Rules Committee, which reports out once a year. The Resolutions Committee puts resolutions out there all the time. It's important that the chairman be in charge of this so that we're in sync with our congressional leaders. So I urge members to vote no on this proposed amendment.
Thank you. The gentleman is the only one standing at the microphone, and so the chair recognizes the gentleman from Hawaii.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Nathan Paikai from the state of Hawaii. I rise in opposition. I'm overwhelmed. This is my first time here. And to be a part of the RNC and who I believe will be the next nominee from the Republican Party. I believe in the leadership of the RNC and what they have done and what we will continue to do. And so I rise in opposition on this amendment because it now brings even more division. When I heard the chairman now speak about unity, that's what I came for. And so I ask you to vote no on this amendment. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Paikai. And since it's your first time here, welcome. We're glad you're here. All right. Is there anyone else who wishes to be heard on this amendment? Seeing no one, we'll move directly to a vote on the amendment. All of those in favor of adopting the amendment, please say aye. Anyone opposed? Nay. The nays have it. We'll move now to Amendment 10.9. Amendment 10.9 impacts the language of Rule 10A4. And it has also been submitted by Mr. Semenko of Idaho, who is hereby recognized for the purpose of making a motion.
Madam Chair, thank you. And I hope everyone agrees with me that this is a healthy discussion to have about the relative balance within the Republican National Committee between the chairman and the members. And obviously there's somewhat of a tension between the Rules and the Resolutions Committee, and I appreciate the discussion that was had. This is a similar amendment with regard to the Standing Committee on Site Selection of the Republican National Convention, and I just put before you again the idea that it may be better, as it is in the case of rules, to have that determined by the members themselves as to the chairman of that committee. And with that, happy to yield to others to debate. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Semenko. It's been moved. Is there a second? Is there a second? There is a second. Mr. Semenko, because I was the appointed chairman of the Site Selection Committee for this convention, would you prefer that Mr. Kaufman take the chair, or are you all right with me continuing to preside?
Madam Chair, having disclosed that, I have no problem. I don't know if anyone else does, but thank you for that.
Thank you, Mr. Semenko. Is there anyone who rises in opposition? The lady from California.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I'm opposed to this amendment for the same reasons that I opposed the prior couple that we've heard, and they seem to be implying that there's something wrong with the leadership.
I'm sorry, we didn't get your name and state. My fault.
California, you said.
Yes.
My name is Harmeet Dillon from the great state of California. I oppose this amendment because I believe the chair is doing a fine job. And speaking from my experience as the vice chairman in the California Republican Party, a large party, I think it's important for the chairman to have the freedom to pick the people that he works with, and that's part of the chairman's satisfaction in his job as well. And I think that we need to have chairs who are empowered to get things done with people they get along with and people they have confidence in, as opposed to creating multiple power centers in the party, which is not conducive to unity. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone else who rises in support? Anyone who rises in support of this amendment? Is there anyone who would like to be recognized in opposition? Ms. Holman.
Jill Homan from Washington, D.C. I'm opposed to this amendment. I served on the Site Selection Committee with the chairman, Ian Mickelson, and I think folks should know how difficult of a job it is. I think Cleveland Host Committee can attest to how much is involved in terms of the negotiation with all the different parties. Not to mention, when you have the election, you're only electing 8 people, and so you do need, a 9th. But I think it's important that we allow the chairman to appoint someone with the right skill set and someone who is able to negotiate and represent us well. And so I think it's critically important that we enable the chairman to appoint this position. Thanks.
Thank you, Mrs. Holman. Is there anyone else who would like to be recognized in support of the amendment? Is there anyone else who would like to be recognized in opposition to the amendment? Mr. Barnett of Arkansas.
Jonathan Barnett from Arkansas. Thank you, Madam Chairman. I, too, was privileged to be on the Site Selection Committee, and so those of you that are here from Cleveland, you can thank people like me and Jill and some others. I guess we'll find out on the backside if, that we get criticized on the backside was good.
I'm sure Cleveland will do a great job. It's some
sure
of the outside visitors I'm a little concerned about.
I may have been a little concerned about our chairwoman on the front side, but after the first meeting or two, I had full confidence and faith and thought she was very capable and very competent. And but anyhow, there's 8 members on the Site Selection Committee, and we worked very well together. The 8 members actually make the choice. It's not the chairwoman or the chairperson of that committee. It's actually the 8 committee members. And I think we all kind of worked very independently as far as our thought process was concerned, but we collaborated together very well and came together and made the very best decision possible. This is not a sword that we need to die on. It's again, obviously trying to take more powers away. But anyhow, I do rise in opposition. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Barnett. Is there anyone else who rises in support? Mr. Ash, do you rise in support?
No, ma'am.
All right. Mr. Dupre, do you rise in opposition?
I rise in opposition. The California delegate expressed it well. We have to have faith in our chief executive officer, our chairman, and I would like to move the previous question.
Previous question is in order. All of those who would like to end debate on this issue, please say aye. Any opposed, say no. The ayes have it. We will now move directly to a vote on the amendment. All of those in favor of Mr. Semenko's amendment, which reads that the chairman of the Standing Committee on Site Selection of the Republican National Convention shall be elected by its members from among the members thereof. All those in favor, please say aye. Any opposed, nay. The nays have it. I believe that completes our work on Rule 10. And now we move to Rule 12. I'm getting ahead of myself. All right. So that completes our work on Rule 10. We'll now move to Rule 12, and then I need to remind you that we set aside a number of other amendments to be taken up at the end of Rule 12, so that you don't give up all hope of ever getting a little bit of a break. After we have finished all of the amendments to Rules 1 through 12, we will take a 30-minute break to allow you to get some afternoon refreshments that we've provided for you and to allow the staff to get all of the amendments for the next section loaded up. All right, let's move to amendment number 12.1. This is Rule 12, and this is an amendment submitted by Mr. Blackwell of Virginia. Mr. Blackwell, you are recognized for the purpose of making a motion.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. My motion is to strike Rule 12 in its entirety.
Thank you, Mr. Blackwell. Is there a second? It's been moved and seconded that Rule 12 be stricken in its entirety. Mr. Blackwell, would you like to address the merits of your amendment?
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I've communicated to the members of this committee on this topic prior to this meeting. It went by email, and if you are like me, fellow members, I didn't open all the emails for the past period of time. I want to read what I said to the members of this committee into the record. This rule permits the RNC to change the rules between our national conventions. It's the worst of the 2012 power grabs by the Romney campaign. It is the worst rules change ever inserted into our national party rules. It should be deleted entirely. For generations, conservatives praised as the greatest advantage of the rules of the Republican Party over the National Democratic Party rules the fact that no RNC chairman could change the National Party rules between conventions. The Democrats' National Committee has been free to change the rules between conventions, and they often do so. They couch proposed rules changes in good government terms, but they all know, and the public knows, that most often their proposed rules changes are designed to help this or that candidate or this or that faction of their party. This generates constant, ugly battles for power between the conventions. Now, of necessity, the RNC chairman has very great powers. For all practical purposes, the RNC chairman controls the RNC funds, including how much RNC money, if any, goes to any state party and how much RNC money, if any, goes to any Republican nominee of any state party. The RNC chairman controls the RNC's hiring decisions. The RNC chairman decides which RNC members are appointed to many powerful positions in the national party structure. Every RNC national chairman, if that chairman wishes, can get the votes at an RNC meeting of a majority of RNC members, and I know that. I've been on the committee a long time. Members of the committee know that. Usually it's a supermajority.
Your time has expired. I'm sorry, sir. You can seek unanimous consent to extend your remarks for 2 more minutes, but that would require unanimous consent of the body.
Well, all right. I would ask for unanimous consent for 2 more minutes.
Is there any objection? Hearing none, please. There is an objection. I'm sorry, Mr. Blackwell. All right. Is there anyone who would like to rise in opposition?
Yes.
Mr. Dupree.
Steve Dupree from New Hampshire. I rise in strenuous opposition to this proposal, notwithstanding my good friend Morton Blackwell. I think this was one of the most important rules changes we have made, and let me give you the example. We had 23 debates in 2008, 21 in 2012, and we wanted to make sure that didn't happen and that we didn't give the media a chance to embarrass our candidates. But for the fact, had we not had this rule, that we would not have had the ability to pass the rule that said any candidate who who shows up at an unsanctioned debate will be ineligible for later debates. That immediately gave us the control over the debate process, which allowed us to cut the number in half, to spread them out, to have input on who the panels look like, and to make sure they were on a calendar that our candidates could accept. If we pass the Blackwell Amendment, it would limit the ability of the Republican National Committee to deal with emerging situations that need attention between conventions. I think the best proof that there is no abuse of power has been how rarely it was used. I believe that was the only change we made. This rule works. It gives us a great ability to adapt to changing situations, and it would be a terrible mistake to strike this rule. So I urge members to vote no on this proposed amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Dupree. Is there anyone who rises in support? Is there anyone who rises in support? Yes. Right here.
Gwen Bowen, Louisiana. And although I thought the Republican debates were wonderful, and thank y'all so much, I think there's other places that can be done besides in Rule 12. In 2012, the only difference between maybe my opinion and Delegate Martin Blackwell's is he thought it was the biggest power grab, and I thought it was the second biggest power grab of 2012. I thought 16, which actually was 15 at the time, disavowing a candidate being able to disavow a delegate duly elected. I thought that was the biggest power grab. But I think that this body, this is the grassroots. The people have elected this body to make the decisions for the rules for the next convention, and not the RNC. Although I think the RNC certainly has its place, and they've done good jobs many times, but not always. And so I'd encourage you to vote to delete Rule 12, which there was a lot of people not wanting to support Rule 12, almost to the point we had a minority report, but we didn't. We did it on Rule 15, which turned 16 instead. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone who would rise to speak in support? Excuse me, in opposition. In opposition. The gentleman from Nevada.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Jordan Ross from Nevada. I have great empathy with what Mr. Blackwell is talking about. As a grassroots Republican who's worked hard to bring greater transparency and checks and balances to the Republican Party in Nevada, I have a great deal of empathy for what he's expressing here. The problem is that in a 21st century political environment, we cannot have our primary governing documents locked up and unable to change except once every 4 years. There needs to be some flexibility. We dealt with this problem in Nevada by coming up with a hierarchical system. We've got bylaws, we've got standing rules for our State Central Committee and standing rules for our Executive Committee. We're not going to have the time to come up with a solution that complex. I urge a solution to come up with that. But in the meantime, we have got to preserve some minimal flexibility. And I've looked at this carefully. The power that's being presented that currently that the RNC exercises for rulemaking authority is limited, and I think it's safe enough to say that it'll be safe for another 4 years. We do need to make changes. Mr. Blackwell's right. But this, unfortunately, regrettably, I have to say this because I've worked so hard for transparency and for checks and balances in our own state party, this, unfortunately, is throwing the baby out with the bathwater. Just can't do it in this day and age. I mean, I'm a 59-year-old grandfather, and I'm walking around with, not with one, but with 2 cell phones, you know, and constantly 24 hours a day. The ground game in politics changes constantly. I stand in opposition to the amendment. I ask you that we have to think like a 21st century party. Thank you. Please vote no.
Thank you. Is there someone who wishes to rise in support? Is there any?
Yes. Harriet Hageman from Wyoming. I'm going to continue to provide the information for Mr. Blackwell. I rise in support of this amendment. As Mr. Blackwell stated, the most effective check on the power of the RNC chairman was that the national chairman was bound by the rules adopted by the most recent national convention, and that only the next national convention could change those rules. Rule 12 destroys that safeguard. Generations of serious party activists and leaders at national conventions have written into our national rules some important protections against abuse of power in the RNC. For example, Rule 11 prevents the RNC from contributing money or in-kind aid to a candidate in any state who is not yet the Republican nominee, unless all 3 of the state's RNC members file with the RNC prior written approval of that RNC intervention. This rule tends to protect conservative candidates. In living memory, many very different people have served as chairman of the RNC. Some have proved to be skilled, honorable, and productive. Others have quite capriciously thrown their weight around. Some have been pawns of consultants who helped elect them or of other cronies who were enriched by their proximity to the seat of power in the party. Some national chairmen have left the RNC in a sound financial position. Others have left the RNC broke and deep in debt. Nevertheless, over the years, our party has had national chairmen who served our party much better than the Democrats' party chairman served their party. One aspect of human nature is that people who have power tend to use that power to stay in power and to increase their power. That's why our Constitution set up a system of checks and balances and separation of powers in government. There may be no practical alternative to our national party chairman having many great powers. We could not operate effectively if the RNC membership had to vote on how much RNC financial support goes to which candidate in which states. Until now, however, all RNC chairmen, regardless of their motives and probity, have been bound by the rules in effect when they were elected. That's a healthy check which limits even the temptation to abuse power or to centralize it too much. Rule 12 must be repealed. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there others who wish to speak in opposition?
Yes.
I'm going to go first to Mrs. Costa because she hasn't spoken yet today.
Cindy Costa from South Carolina. I rise in opposition of this amendment for the very fact that Mr. Blackwell spoke a while ago. He said that it was very difficult to get 2 people from one state. Now we're asking that we get a 3/4 vote from the entire body to change a rule, which I think is a much higher bar than what he was talking about earlier. So I think because we would not change a rule unless it was a very serious rule that had to be changed, we would never get to that 3/4 if we were tinkering around and playing with our rules and trying to, do something for, one state's benefit. So I would say this is a protective rule that we need in our rules, and that with that high bar, there won't be any gamesmanship. Everybody on this committee is pretty smart, and so they don't really allow for that kind of thing. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there others who wish to speak in support? Ms. Ambrose.
Nickley Ambrose, Maryland. I just want to remind everyone that this came about in 2012, and it was the brainchild of Ben Ginsburg. This outraged people in my home state of Maryland, so much so that we had a leadership sweep. And I encourage you to realize that a lot of what we've seen in the past 4 years, we've talked about power, going back to the people and people wanting to actually have a direct vote and direct influence in how the affairs of our party. I am encouraging you to think about what this means in your home state. People were upset in 2012, and they will remain upset unless we fix the things that upset them. So, with that said, I love giving power to convention bodies. They're the ultimate authority. That is why we are here, to get things right so we can propose great, fantastic rules that everyone will be happy with. Thank you very much.
Is there anyone else who wishes to speak in opposition?
Yes, ma'am.
Mr. Ash.
Madam Chairman, Bruce Ash from Arizona. For those of you who know me, you know me as being a traditionalist. When I first heard of the Rule 12 concept at the last convention, Rules Committee, it struck me dumbfounded. I wasn't sure what to think at first. It didn't take long for me to realize, though, it was providential. And as it turned out, some of the rules that were imposed upon the RNC at the last Rules Convention, we used Rule 12 to get rid of nearly all of those, to give back delegate empowerment, to give back activist empowerment. This has been used as a tool for good. I respect and admire, and I have to admit openly, Morton Blackwell is one of my heroes. And I question my own judgment anytime he and I aren't on the same on the same wavelength. But for the very reasons that Mr. Blackwell supports eliminating Rule 12, I think those are the reasons why we want to continue Rule 12, to make changes in rules that didn't work, that created problems with grassroots empowerment, but also, as some of the others have maintained, to make sure that our party remains active and able to react to anything that happens in the political landscape between now and 2020. Steve Dupre, Madam Chairman, said that we only changed the debate committee. Or created the debate committee. We did lots of different things under Rule 12. Some of them weren't quite appreciated or understood back home in Arizona, but I am proud of every single change that we made under Rule 12, and it had to meet the very highest possible threshold at 75%. In fact, most of the times we were at 80 or 85%. Thank you very much for your consideration.
Thank you, Mr. Ashe. Is there anyone else who rises in support? Anyone who rises in support? Mr. Ross.
Madam Chairman, I support the deletion of Rule 12. I've studied the Democrat Party as they began to do this, and when they gave their committee the ability to change rules, it was for things that were fairly innocuous on their side in the beginning, but it got worse and worse and worse. I think it's a very dangerous road that we go down. I think it was great, in fact, that we got the debates in. I thought that was a wonderful thing. I think it was an unusual thing, but I believe we should keep it as it was prior to all the things that happened in the last 8 years and revert to having the convention being the ultimate arbiter of the rules. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Is there someone who would wish to speak in opposition?
Yes, Madam Chairman.
Mr. Munisteri.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. If you don't have a mechanism for dealing with an extraordinary circumstance, what would you do? Just use common sense. For example, if you had a court order that made you change the way you operated, but your rules did not allow you to adjust, what would you do? This is not a hypothetical situation. When I was state chairman of the Texas Republican Party, we were sued a number of times. We had to get permission by the Department of Justice, and we had to comply with court orders that required us to change our rules, and we had a mechanism. What would the Republican Party do if it faced an extraordinary circumstance and you don't have a chance to adjust? It's just common sense. Now, we were talking about the grassroots. It requires 75% to get agreement. Who comprises that 75%? There are RNC members such as Tony DeShiel from our state and Tom Meckler and Robin Armstrong. They're elected by 9,000 delegates. If they did something that was untoward, when they got back, they wouldn't be reelected. And something else that hasn't been mentioned, we allow our body to get rid of our chairman or chairwoman if we don't like them or overstep by 2/3 vote. If you don't think your chairman is doing the right thing or chairwoman, and you think they're abusing power, we have a mechanism to get rid of the chairman. People are acting as if the chairman has all the leverage. I can't think of greater leverage than the ability, as our presumptive nominee would say, you're fired. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Munisteri. Is there anyone else who rises to speak in support? The gentleman from Utah, Mr. Lee.
Mike Lee from Utah. Thank you. I'm always concerned about any proposal or any existing rule that seems to tend to allow one group of people or one person to accumulate too much power. I think we can spot a certain trend that's evolved today, a trend toward not passing those amendments that tend to disperse power, rejecting those amendments that tend to disperse power and leave them in the hands of the delegates. Now, it is certainly true that under Rule 12, you've got to have a supermajority or a super-duper majority, you might call it, in order to exercise this rule. But that doesn't mean that that will serve as a significant check. What if, in fact, you see the RNC seeing things overwhelmingly the same way that the chairman sees them over and over and over again? So in many respects, this could disempower delegates as a whole. This could disempower the party at large, members of the grassroots. And so I think we've got to be very skeptical of things that help facilitate the accumulation of power in the hands of the few, especially given that we aspire to be a party that is more inclusive, a party that brings people in, that encourages grassroots activity. That is, after all, where our vitality as a party is found. Lastly, I will say I was a little bit surprised by the fact that when the sponsor of this amendment asked what I thought was a very modest request, that he be given 2 additional minutes to complete his very short remarks, we saw multiple objections. I work in a body where unanimous consent is constantly given, where someone just needs another minute or 2. The fact that people are so upset at the suggestion that we consider getting rid of Rule 12 gives me additional reason to support this amendment and to encourage each member of this committee to strongly consider doing the same. Thank you.
Are there others who wish to speak in opposition? Mr. DeVito.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Vincent DeVito, Massachusetts. I urge a no vote for this particular amendment. I have the privilege of speaking to this rule 2 conventions in a row. This is not a rule that gave carte blanche. It was a rule that was negotiated thoughtfully among many smart people 4 years ago. And the super-duper majority referenced prior to me is exactly right. That is a very high threshold and restriction. I want to emphasize also the other restriction on this particular rule as it stands. It is a 2-year window of operation. It is not a carte blanche, and it is not a grab of any type of power. It is simply a thoughtful process to be used for exigent circumstances. Thank you for the opportunity to speak to this rule again this year.
Thank you, sir. Is there anyone else who wishes to rise in support? Anyone who wishes to rise in support? Anyone who wishes to rise in opposition? Mr. Paikai.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm in strong opposition. This is a safety valve for the people. This is a safety valve for the RNC, for this committee, for anything that comes together to bring unity. It brings an opportunity for everyone to speak. If you get rid of this, you give no one an opportunity to voice their concerns. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Paikai. Are there others who wish to speak? Someone who wishes to speak in support? Mr. Frias.
People have made some very good points on both sides. I respect my colleagues on the RNC. I'm a member of the RNC. This is a great power the RNC's been given. But I hear what Senator Lee stated, and to me, I'm always concerned about concentration of power. This isn't about who appoints what to committee. This is about who decides what the rules are. In the end, when I have to make a decision about who has the ultimate authority over this rules, is it 1,237 delegates on Monday or 126 RNC members? I prefer a larger group than a smaller group. In response to some of the comments that have been made that we're in the 21st century, we need to make changes as events occur, I recognize that. In the past, we would create a carve-out and say, in regards to rules in the presidential primary for this, the RNC can make a change later on. You do not grant this level of power to a smaller group. If you're going to give that level of power to a smaller group, you make it as narrow as possible. This is my opinion. The Rule 12 has worked fine, by the way. So everybody knows that I'm not making any insults or attacking anybody. Rule 12 has worked fine these last couple of years. I do not worry about how things have worked under Chairman Priebus. I worry about the future. When I vote for a rule or a law or anything, I think not just about the best case scenarios. but the worst-case scenarios. I apologize to my colleagues on the RNC for voting against Rule 12, but that's just my view. And I know everyone's going to start attacking or whatever, but have a nice day.
You too, Mr. Frias. The chair recognizes Mr. Ryder.
John Ryder from Tennessee, and no apology is necessary from the gentleman from Rhode Island. These are all legitimate points. This is a very important debate. We had this debate 4 years ago. We had the debate 4 years prior to that when we adopted a similar rule regarding amendments to Rule 15C as it then existed concerning the primary calendar, not some of the other elements of 15. And the issue is this. First, can we give the party some limited flexibility to deal with emergency situations and changing circumstances as they evolve over the next couple of years? And second, can we give the Republican Party the ability to debate and deliberate over issues that it is not possible for this committee to adequately address in the 2 or 2.5 days that we have? And we just addressed that last when we passed the amendment to Rule 10, which created a commission to examine the presidential primary system. And we modeled this on Rule 10D from 8 years ago, which created the Temporary Delegate Selection Commission, whose purpose was to examine how the calendar works. And these are extraordinarily complex issues because they involve a large number of rules, a multiplicity of the rules, and require some lengthy deliberations. And that commission took testimony, conducted hearings, and conducted deliberations over many days, something this committee does not have the luxury of doing. So, ladies and gentlemen, I would urge that we oppose this amendment. We retain Rule 12. We retain the ability to have limited flexibility for a limited period of time upon limited circumstances, and that we give the Republican Party, through its national committee, the ability to deliberate carefully over some of the more complex issues before us. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Ryder. The chair sees Mr. Dupre at the microphone. Yes. Mr. Dupre, you're recognized.
Madam Chairman, Steve Dupre from New Hampshire. I would like to move the previous question. I would respectfully request a division vote on this important issue, and I urge members to vote no on this amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Dupre. We've moved previous question. All those in favor of previous question, please say aye. Aye. All those opposed, nay. We will move to a vote on the amendment. The amendment from Mr. Blackwell would strike Rule 12 in its entirety. We will move directly to a standing vote. All those in favor of adopting Mr. Blackwell's amendment and striking Rule 12, please stand. Thank you. You may be seated. All those against adopting Rule 12, please stand. Sorry to leave you standing so long. Just stay there. I still see them doing this. We have to make sure that all of the tallies match. Thank you. You can be seated. The vote is as follows. Those in favor, 23. Those opposed, 86. The amendment fails. Now we will go back and take up those amendments, all of which we had postponed to a definite time to be taken up after Rule 12. So we're going to be moving quickly. We will take them in order again, Rules 1 through 12. I'm just going to ask you to pay attention so that when your amendment comes up, you're prepared to address the group. We will start with Amendment 1.1. This is an amendment to Rule 1C dealing with lobbyists, and it has been submitted by Ms. Marianne Kinney of Maine and Ms. Cindy Pugh of Minnesota.
Madam Chair.
Mr. Evans.
Just a point of parliamentary inquiry, please.
Yes, sir.
Would it be in order to make a motion to refer these rules that we have deferred for consideration pursuant to Rule 12, since none operate to affect the operation, or none have any impact on the operation of the convention?
The parliamentarians informed me that we would have to do each one individually, but that it would be in order to do so.
Okay. I would so move on the first motion.
All right, it's been moved and seconded that consideration of this amendment be, and what was the language that you used, sir? Referred to the committee established under Rule 12. Is that correct? For consideration under Rule 12. Thank you. It's been moved and seconded. Is there any debate?
Yes, ma'am.
Mr. Blackwell.
Am I to understand then that now that we have Rule 12 saved, that matters which routinely were decided by the Convention Rules Committee and the Convention are now to be handed over to the Republican National Committee to be determined by the use of Rule 12? I mean,
Sir,
this
that
is
will be
an abandonment of grassroots power. Power in this party should flow from the bottom up. This is truly an outrage. Truly an outrage. We've seen, if this passes, it's a wholesale abandonment of the rights of the people who are going to vote on the adoption of the Rules Committee, and to turn it over to a body where the national chairman routinely has a supermajority of delegates who vote where he wants. This is an outrage for the conservative grassroots.
This will be up to this body to decide. And I will leave it simply at that it is up to this body to make that determination. With that, I will recognize Mr. Barber.
Henry Barber from Mississippi. I will just say, as a lobbyist, I'm fine with this committee deciding this issue. Thank you.
All right. Is there anyone who rises to support Mr. Evans' motion?
Madam Chair, may I just withdraw my motion?
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Evans. Okay. All right. We still have a motion to postpone indefinitely that was on the floor, and I advise the body that if you want to be able to take up this amendment, which I believe is now Mr. Evans' will as well, we need to take a vote to lift the postponing to a indefinitely. How would we phrase it? All right. So all those in favor of lifting the postponement, which would in effect allow us to consider this amendment, please say aye. Aye. All those opposed, no. The ayes have it. All right. Now, we will move, Ms. Kinney, to consideration of your amendment. It has been, did we get back to the motion?
Yes, we are.
We are now to the motion.
Great, thank you. I never got a chance to give my reason for proposing it in the first place.
Well, now you'll get that opportunity.
So as a state representative, I can see differences in lobbyists. This amendment is meant to keep those with a financial stake in being on the RNC. We are the party led by the common man. I, for one, for example, am a farmer in Maine, not those with ulterior motives. Let's reduce the influence peddling without appearance of impropriety. Should have picked a different word. Nonprofit lobbyists are exempt, which include but not limited to the NRA, of which I am a lifetime member, the National Right to Life, or other nonprofit lobbyists. And this amendment is brought forth to slow down the purchase of the RNC by the for-profit influences. Thank you.
Thank you. Are those who wish to be recognized in opposition to this amendment? Gentlelady from California.
Madam Chairman, Harmeet Dillon from California. I speak as a member of this body and as a First Amendment lawyer from California. I believe that banning people from participating in politics because of their chosen profession is both un-American and conflicts with the fundamental right to earn a living, which is part of our freedom guaranteed by the Constitution. This amendment would not only ban anybody who works for any entity that does lobbying, with the alleged exception of nonprofit. We don't have time in 2 minutes to get into the distinctions between 501c3 and 501c4, but it, in addition, is unlimited as to duration. So anybody who'd ever worked as a lobbyist at any point in their careers would be banned, according to this rule, from ever serving as a member. And I think that is excessive as well. With registered lobbyists, which is the case both at the federal level and in most of our states, there is total transparency. There isn't backroom dealing. Once we single out lobbyists, we're looking at singling out other potential disfavored professions, such as plaintiffs' lawyers, such as used car salesmen, such as insurance agents, perhaps, such as farmers who people don't like. As the preamble to our rules say, Republicans believe in bringing people together and in freedom of speech, not carving them into separate groups and casting them out. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone who wishes to rise in support? Anyone who wishes to rise in support? Yes, thank you.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. Cindy Pugh from Minnesota. And as a state representative, I've witnessed firsthand the influence of paid lobbyists focused on spending hard-earned taxpayer dollars versus advocating for everyday, hardworking citizens. I strongly encourage support of this pro-grassroots rule. Our Republican Party should be giving voice to everyday, hardworking citizens and not giving in to the voices of insider lobbyists employed by government and for-profit corporations. This rule wouldn't affect, as my colleague and the author of this amendment mentioned, it wouldn't affect, for example, a registered paid lobbyist for the Right to Life, Inc., because that's a nonprofit organization, or a gun activist, for example, who voluntarily lobbies on behalf of the NRA, ILA, the NRA's lobbying arm. But it would affect John, for example, an employee for the Podesta Group, one of D.C.'s largest D.C. lobbyist firms, who would be affected. So I encourage a favorable vote for this amendment, so that this rule that no RNC member has a financial stake in being on the RNC. And this kind of insider politics has been heavily permeated within the DNC, and we all know that. Republican voters have overwhelmingly rejected insider politics this election cycle, and our presumptive nominee has clearly campaigned against special interests too. Republicans need to make a bold statement that we stand in strong contrast and have higher standards than the Democrat Party. We make America great again when we empower the everyday American instead of insider lobbyists with ulterior motives. So I urge the committee to support this amendment.
Thank you. Is there someone who wishes to speak in opposition?
Madam
Mrs.
Chairwoman, Mike Stewart, West Virginia. I stand in opposition to this. I truly believe that every state should be able to determine its representatives to the RNC, whether that be 3 priests, 3 pastors, 3 lobbyists, 3 coal miners, or 3 flood victims from southern West Virginia. I think this is important ultimately at the end of the day. It's a states' rights issue that each state gets to determine who we send to this important body, the Republican National Committee. I'd also point out that if we pass this, the lobbyist industry is not going to go away. They're still going to be there. But the Republican National Committee will be viewed as an exclusionary, potentially hostile group to this group that plays an important role in the way our government functions. And so with that, I just urge you to oppose this amendment. While it's appealing on its surface, trust me, it's appealing on its surface, right? Who loves the lobbyists? It's like a used car salesman, right? And I'm a lawyer. At what point do we decide who can be members of the RNC? Let's leave that to the people in our districts, in our states, and let's proudly vote against this amendment.
Thank you. Are there others who wish to speak in support of the amendment? Others who wish to speak? Yes. Gentlelady from Louisiana.
I just wanted, Gwen Bowen, Louisiana, I just wanted to make one thing clear. I understood our fellow delegate who was opposed to this said that this would eliminate anyone who is or ever has been a lobbyist, and that's not what this says. This says if you are a paid lobbyist, not if you have been. I just want to make that clear. And another thing, it seemed to be conflicting. This would exempt nonprofits such as Right to Life, exempt the NRA lobbyist. So actually, it's just, you know, there's, it's the grassroots people would actually not be, you know, they would be exempt from this. And there's a lot of lobbyists on this committee right now. And, you know, we have a media watching, and so we have an opportunity to say the Republican Party is the grassroots party, and it's the grassroots people that's going to make the decisions for the rules, and not the lobbyist, the paid lobbyist. Thank you.
Chair recognizes Mrs. DeMonte.
Demetra DeMonte, a National Committee woman for Illinois. I rise in opposition to this amendment. I have to say, when I first heard about this amendment, I thought it might be a good deal, a good idea. Let's face it, lobbyists, in some circles, it's not exactly the nicest term, but after reflection, I started thinking, okay, if we start with lobbyists, where do we go from there? Do we go to lawyers? Do we go to consultants? Political operators, campaign managers, even elected officials. So it is now my belief that this amendment, although well-intended, and I do think it is well-intended, is not practical, and I think it's going to open up a Pandora's box. So therefore, I respectfully ask you in joining me in voting no on this amendment. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. DeMonte. Are there others who wish to speak in support? Support. Mr. Yu.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Actually, this is a philosophical debate. Do we want limited government, more spending, and we want small government, we want big government, and also we want lobbyists to dictate and carry favors for the big industry at a disadvantage of small business. We have conflict of interest here. If our goal is reduce size of government and government spending, and we're 20 trillion in debt, meanwhile, you have paid lobbyists. They are paid to lobbying for a third party for profit and for favorable regulations. That is crony capitalism. Either we believe in small government or we shouldn't be in this business as a party. This is a political party after all. And do we want politics as usual? Of course not. And last point is, take a look at our nominee Donald Trump's message, how he got where he is today. So I'm supporting this measure. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Yu. Does the gentleman rise in support or in opposition?
In opposition, Madam Chair.
All right. And let me just say at this juncture, I apologize that I don't know all of your names in all of your states, but if you look at how small the type print is, you'll understand why I can't always see where you're from. So this gentleman is recognized. If you could give us your name and state, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Alex Willett from the state of Maine.
It was my honor to serve as the Assistant House Republican Leader in the Maine legislature. And in Maine, we passed some very great reforms limiting the impact of lobbying on the Maine legislature. But in doing that, Maine has some great laws involving registration of lobbyists, but some other states don't. And my concern with this amendment is that it would create an unfair patchwork of different definitions of lobbyists throughout the different states. So where someone may be able to serve on the RNC in the state of California or Colorado would not be able to because they have to register as a lobbyist in Maine. I think it should be up to the individual states when electing their national committee folks to make that decision whether they want a registered lobbyist or not. And so I oppose this.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. All right. Are there those who wish to speak in support? Mr. Blackwell.
We have seen over a long period of time a process by which power in our party has been centralized. The trend of what we have voted today has been to defeat efforts to decentralize and to pass efforts to centralize. There is a real problem with lobbyists, as described in the resolution, who benefit from their membership on the Republican National Committee and make their livings, sometimes really good livings, by lobbying and the influence that they have as part of our national committee. Such people tend to favor centralizing power because if you're a lobbyist, all you got to do is lobby the person who has the power. It's a lot harder to get the committee to pass something if you got to convince everybody at the grassroots. And it's a problem that needs to be solved. And I would like to run a little experiment. The words are, a person who is registered with any government entity as a paid lobbyist for an entity other than a nonprofit organization or who is employed by an entity whose primary purpose is providing lobbying services to others. I would like to ask for a show of hands, how many people on this committee or in this room are in fact registered lobbyists with a government entity?
Mr. Blackwell, I'm sorry, but such a demonstration is not appropriate in this body.
Under what grounds is it not?
Well,
Cannot a speaker make a request?
I will refer to the parliamentarians who just so advised me. They advised me that under Roberts that is designated a straw poll and is therefore inappropriate for this body. I'm sorry, sir.
Gee, it would have been fun. Thank you.
I'm sure it would have been. However, if I start bending Roberts for one, we open the floodgates, and I just can't do that. The chair recognizes Ms. Hudson, and then we're just going to go back and forth between these microphones until everyone who's had a chance to speak gets their opportunity.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Susie Hudson from Vermont. I rise in opposition to this amendment for the reason that it's been stated that this amendment empowers the grassroots. But by telling them who they can or cannot vote for, how exactly are we empowering them? We're actually taking away a candidate that they can consider voting for, and so I would encourage you to vote against this amendment.
Mr. Dupree.
Steve Dupree from New Hampshire. Some of these points have been made before, but let's start with the basic one. We are elected by our states. In New Hampshire, there are 550 people who get to vote. We're home to Sturm Ruger, we're home to SIG, we're home to a lot of gun manufacturers. Are we going to say that because somebody works in the government relations department in the state capital in New Hampshire, they're ineligible to serve? You know, some states have considered that. Virginia has a law, I believe Indiana does. But that doesn't mean we here should impose that on everyone else. It's also important to keep in mind that in some states, if you are an employee in a firm, let's say it's a law firm, and there's one lobbyist who's a lobbyist, and you're a trusts and estates lawyer, you're deemed a lobbyist because you're a member of the firm, and you'd be disqualified. I also want to think about the fallacy of saying we're solving this problem with a not-for-profit exemption. Under this rule, someone who is a registered lobbyist for Planned Parenthood, who many of you would find not perhaps a good fit on this committee, could run for office, but somebody who's a lobbyist in the state capitol for SIG or Sturm Ruger could not. It's manifestly unfair. The other thing to keep in mind is that if we are going to start accusing people who are engaged in the honorable profession of lobbying of being ineligible, we should look at the pernicious influence of people who do business with our committee. Vendors or people who are paid by some of our entities like the Senatorial Committee, the NRCC, the RNCC, the Governors Association, Republicans overseas. There are members here who have had contracts with them and vendors. And that's the slope, that would be arguably to some much more offensive than being a lobbyist. I urge everyone to vote no on this amendment.
Is there anyone else who rises in support?
Madam Chairman.
Mr. Ash.
Bruce Ash from Arizona. I speak in support, but I would like to offer an amendment for consideration.
That is in order.
And if I could, I want to go with the microphone over because my eyes are so bad I can't see this.
Please, we want you to be able to see what you'd like to do.
Okay. What I propose is where it says providing lobbying services to other, and then where it says shall be ineligible to serve as a member of the Republican National Committee or as a proxy for any member of the Republican National Committee, that be struck and simply say, and don't put anything up just yet, but my concept is just to provide disclosure, okay? A simple disclosure statement, which is not unusual. Okay, well, that's great. Which is not unusual for almost any organization that many of us belong to back in our respective communities. Mr.
Ash, I'm going to ask you to come to the council's table and work out the specific language while we allow others who have already been standing in line for quite some time, some of them, to be able to express their opinions. And then when you have that drafted, we'll come back to your motion.
I would just ask that we not call for the previous question and get cut off in the meantime. I will go as fast as I can.
All right. The chair would ask individuals not to move for previous question until Mr. Ash has had an opportunity to present his amendment. The chair will recognize Mrs. Davidson from Ohio.
Joanne Davidson for the state of Ohio. You know, earlier in this week at the Republican National Committee, we adopted a resolution. And that resolution stated what I think many of us believe very strongly in, that federal regulations on businesses and other entities are hurting our economy. And we felt that that was unfair. Now, if you are not permitting people to serve on the Republican National Committee that maybe have represented some of these interests, like the National Federation of Independents or a Chamber of Commerce where the local businesses depend upon them to represent them, obviously, or the farmers, our agriculture community, to testify why those regulations are not needed and try to protect themselves so that they can continue to profit and provide the jobs and give the strong economy that we want. I'm not quite sure what we're trying to do.
Thank you, Mrs. Davidson. Is there anybody else who would like to speak in support? All right, the lady over here, you've already spoken once, and so we need to allow everyone else an opportunity to speak before we can give you a second opportunity to speak. Mr. Yu, have you already spoken to this particular amendment?
Yes, but
yes,
this is based on personal privilege.
And what is your point of personal privilege?
The National Committeeman, New Hampshire, mentioned somebody could be paid, got a contract.
Excuse me, sir, this is not a point of personal privilege.
No. May I?
No, I'm sorry, it's not a point of personal privilege. If you have a point of personal privilege, you may bring it, but you cannot use a point of personal privilege to make arguments. All right, we'll recognize the lady standing at this microphone.
Madam Chairman, Pat Thomas from Missouri. I'd like every one of my colleagues here, and thank you for serving on this committee, to realize that why are we differentiating between for-profit and not-for-profit? We've had many people here today talk about money grabs and big government and all these issues. Many not-for-profits take much more administrative dollars from our tax dollars, and to many of us, we would actually say they misuse them to a larger degree. So for that reason, I would urge you to vote no on this amendment.
Thank you. Is there anyone else who has not spoken previously who rises to speak in support? The gentleman here.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chairman. Guy Short from Colorado. First, I want to thank you for allowing this debate to happen, and I'd like to also thank Mr. Evans from Georgia for his graciousness of withdrawing his amendment and allowing this debate to happen. I have a question. I would love to hear from perhaps some of those folks who oppose this, or maybe I know there's some folks on the campaign, the gentleman from Massachusetts, I think. I would love
doesn't address the problems, and I don't even get me started on where this is with state rights. You know, if somebody's a lobbyist and their state party wants to elect them, whose business is it? Now, it's off the hook. It's outrageous. It's, I'm sure, well-intentioned. You know, we know this, but you know, what's a nonprofit, for crying out? Hey, you know what? The president of Common Core pays more in income taxes than I take home. So let's, you know, again, what does even nonprofit mean? It's over the top. I urge everyone to vote no.
All right. I see that there are two more people at the microphones who have not yet spoken. I'd like to give them the opportunity to speak, and then we will return to Mr. Ash's amendment if there are no objections. Wonderful. I'd like to recognize this lady. I'm not sure what state you're from, but you're about to tell me.
I'm Nell Frisbee from Mississippi, and have been a worker in the Republican Party for my youth. And you can tell I'm not youth anymore. But have always felt that we start at the grassroots. I believe in the grassroots. And when we elect our people, we start in our county. And I'm a member of the Hancock County Republican Executive Committee. We go to our state convention. We elect our representatives to go to the state. That is about as grassroots as you can get. We go to our state and we represent them. And before, as a delegate to the state convention, I could ask my county, who do they want to support for our national committee man and our national committee woman, as well as the other elected people that we do. So I think it is grassroots. I think it's states' rights, and I think that's where it ought to stay.
Thank you. The chair recognizes the gentleman at this back microphone.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Richard Forston from the state of Delaware. Among other things, I am the party attorney in Delaware, and as a result, I work with our legislators quite a bit in the General Assembly, and so I'm very familiar with the legislative process. And one thing that I'll say troubles me a little bit about the way the RNC conducts its business. This Rules Committee meets once every 4 years. We come together, people have ideas. But a lot of times the legislative process is strengthened by reflection, collaboration, and looking at things more carefully, because one of the things we all have to avoid is the law of unintended consequences. And for example, in Delaware, you're a lobbyist. If you go down to the General Assembly, you work for a company, and your boss says to you, I need you to go down and testify about this bill. Congratulations, you're paid. You're speaking on behalf of legislation. In theory, you have to register as a lobbyist. If a client of mine asks me to go down to the General Assembly, I'm a lawyer, but suddenly I've got to register as a lobbyist, even though I might do it for one client once every 2 or 3 years. And we heard the gentleman from Maine, they have a different definition. And I don't know what the definition or requirements are in West Virginia or Nevada. They're a patchwork. But people may get caught in this innocently enough, and suddenly they're off the RNC. More importantly, though, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. And I don't wonder if this rule isn't a solution in search of a problem. Nobody has pointed out to me any problem that the RNC has had. Nobody has pointed out to me any problem that a state has had in electing its members of the RNC. And I think as long as the states know who they're electing, they're free to send to the RNC whoever they want. So I oppose this amendment on a lot of grounds, not the least of which is that in a 1 hour or half-hour debate that's being held with no prior warning, I don't think we should be doing something like this, because I think it could come back to bite us. Thank you.
Thank you. The chair recognizes Mr. Ash for purposes of his amendment.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Bruce Ash from Arizona. Sorry about the dust-up trying to get this put together. On page 3, line 17, after the word services to others, we would delete everything after that and add, and hopefully this is going up on the board, and is elected to the Republican National Committee, shall disclose to the Secretary of the Republican National Committee his or her status as a lobbyist in a manner to be established by the Secretary. While it might be a great grassroots idea.
Just a moment, Mr. Ash. You've made a motion.
Oh, sorry.
We need a second.
Second.
There is a second.
Okay.
Now, I'd like to let the staff catch up first so that everybody is not looking at the screen instead of listening to you. So let's let them catch up.
Thank you.
All right, Mr. Ash, is that, let's see. Okay, now they're fixing it. Let's give them just a moment. Almost there. All right, thank you. Mr. Ash, if you'd like to proceed.
Great. Thank you very much, Madam Secretary. There have been some wonderful arguments for both sides on this issue, and I admire the delegates who filed this amendment to begin with. We may not get to the place that you want to be, and perhaps a lot of people want to be, with respect to how this is going to be handled. But one thing I think all of us well know from other volunteer work we do and other paid work we do is that we have to disclose other organizations that we might do work for, other conflicts of interest that we may potentially have. We're used to disclosure. And although not a lawyer, I know that disclosure is a very important thing when trying to avoid difficulties in various matters that we have public discourse with. This idea, which would come after services to other and is elected to the Republican National Committee, shall disclose to the Secretary of the Republican National Committee his or her status as a lobbyist in a manner to be established by the Secretary. I think this is a fairly straightforward matter. We have a great counsel's office. I'm sure that they would work with the Secretary of the RNC in order to put this together. We would keep a file at the RNC, and it would be available for public access to members, perhaps. And this would all be at the discretion of the Secretary, of course. But the idea would be is that we would begin disclosure process. That doesn't mean that anybody's disqualified. That doesn't mean that we're taking anybody's ability to earn money. And it doesn't mean that we don't want them to be advocating for either issues, candidates, or any other political means. But it is a start with disclosure. And I urge consideration and adoption.
Thank you, Mr. Ash. Is there someone who would like to speak in opposition? Gentleman here.
Steve Pierce, New Mexico.
I mostly want to speak to the one phrase that stands now and is in the original Amendment 2, and that is the bias in favor of nonprofits. Now, if the attempt is to stop people from increasing the size of the federal budget, which has been the dominant commitment or dominant comment, then I think that understanding that the lobbyists who approach our office in Congress, my office, many times are nonprofits, and they never have asked for us to decrease the budget because many times they are, in fact, the beneficiaries of money that is coming through the budget. So this bias that suddenly nonprofits are more holy than anyone else is something that I think that we would like to closely look at. And then, again, the underlying the comments about all lobbyists are bad. Some lobbyists are extraordinarily good and very knowledgeable. I would not want to approach the idea of nuclear arms proliferation without a paid lobbyist. My deal is, you tell me both sides of the argument. So again, this idea that we've got to treat lobbyists separate. Self-governance requires that we understand who is involved in the self-governance and clear them out if they're no good. Self-governance requires that we have more liberty and more freedom, not choking ourselves down with rules. So with all respect to the sponsor of the amendment, I would urge no on both the amendment to the amendment and the underlying amendment. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone who wishes to speak in support of the amendment to the amendment? In support of the amendment to the amendment. Is there anyone who would like to speak in opposition? Gentleman from West Virginia.
Mike Stewart, West Virginia. I stand in opposition to the amendment. I guess I say, to what point is this registration or declaration with the RNC? I go back to the point that every state should have the right to determine who its representatives are to the RNC. If West Virginia wants to elect 3 coal miners or 3 lobbyists or 3 insurance salesmen, I say that's the right of West Virginia. And who's the RNC to determine that? And so I say, let's leave this to the states. Let's let the states determine who their representatives are. And I oppose the amendment and I oppose the motion.
Is there anyone who would like to speak in favor of the amendment to the amendment?
Yes.
Lady from Minnesota.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Cindy Pugh from Minnesota. I am very supportive of this amendment. In fact, I'm very grateful for it. I think that it definitely enhances transparency. I think that all of our constituency and Americans appreciate transparency. Perception, as we all know, becomes people's reality. And I do believe that it would be right for this body to pass this amendment to the amendment. I'm hopeful for support for the amendment as well. But I do believe that this would be supportive of the will of the people, and I'm grateful. So thank you very much to Committeeman Ash.
Is there anyone else who would like to speak in opposition? The lady at the microphone over here.
Thank you. Christine Serrano-Glassner from New Jersey. What I don't understand, and what's not clear in the new amendment to the amendment, is what will be done eventually with this scarlet letter file of people that have had to disclose. And without that clarification here, I don't see why people would have to disclose. I mean, they should know eventually what's going to be done with that information and how it's going to be used against them. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone else who would like to speak in favor of the amendment to the amendment? In favor. Is there anyone who would like to speak in opposition to the amendment to the amendment? Mr. Evans.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So my niece goes in to see her doctor, and one of the questions on the questionnaire is whether there is a firearm owned in the house. Anybody familiar with this regulation where it's now collected? The bottom line is all about this created collection of disclosure information under the rubric that somehow we have a reason to know. Now, I personally have complete confidence in each of the 50 states, 5 territories, and the District of Columbia to fully vet their committeeman, their committeewoman, and their chair. Find out every piece of information, whether they're a lobbyist or not. And if they make the decision that they want to have a lobbyist, then more power to them, because there are certain states that actually would benefit from having a committeeman or a chair or a committeewoman who is a lobbyist. But there's no reason why we should be the ones that collect all of this information, put it in a secret file, be able to access it later for whatever purpose. It starts to eliminate the distinction between us and them. And so I oppose the amendment to the amendment because I think there comes a point where we actually have to trust our fellow colleagues in the other states to pick the people that represent them best, not who we would want them to pick.
Thank you. The chair would like to recognize anyone who is still in support of the amendment to the amendment. Would anyone like to speak in support of the amendment to the amendment? Would anyone like to speak in opposition to the amendment to the amendment? The lady at this microphone right here.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My name is Judy Schwabach, and I'm from Michigan. In Michigan, we elect our RNC person through the grassroots effort. We do, as Nell said, we elect our precinct delegates, and then they elect, and then they elect, and eventually it comes down to our convention, and that person is elected by the people. Now, I take great exception to the fact that as a body, we may be saying to Mississippi that their representative that they've asked to have sit on the RNC be eliminated, strictly because of his profession. Now, I would expect that the RNC members would take into consideration if anybody is lobbying them, and we know the difference. We know when we're having some smoke blown where it's not supposed to be. So it is up to us as individuals on the RNC to understand the difference and stand up for the rights of the people, but not for this body to eliminate the rights of the people to elect their people. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone else who would like to speak on the amendment to the amendment?
Madam Chairman.
Yes, sir.
Doug Ossie, People's Republic of California. I have interests in a number of states, and I'm trying to figure out under the proposed amendment and the underlying amendment in which of those states am I going to be judged eligible or ineligible. Those of you who are in business today have operated under the past 7 or 8 years, whether purposefully or otherwise, as nonprofit corporations. It's one of the things we're here to try to change. But I question the advisability of moving forward, asking me to pick between the states that I wish to be ruled eligible under, or my representatives. And I certainly don't want to give the government or any pseudo-government organization any of my private information that I so zealously guard in the first place. So I'm speaking against the amendment that's on the screen, as well as the underlying amendment. Thank you, Madam Chairman.
Thank you. The chair would recognize the gentlelady from New Mexico.
Rosie Tripp from New Mexico. Madam Chairman, I call for the question on the amendment to the amendment.
All right. We've heard, I assume you meant previous question. Yes. All right. All those in favor of closing debate on the amendment to the amendment, please say aye. Aye. All those opposed, nay. The ayes have it. We'll now move to consideration of the amendment to the amendment. All those in favor of including the information that you currently see in green on your screen, if you are in favor of adding that language, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed, nay. The nays have it. We'll now move to a vote on the main motion. If we can get it back up on the screen. Do we have other people who would like to be heard on the main motion?
For the purpose of an amendment to the amendment?
We can't do an amendment. Wait, yes, you can. That's still, I was thinking it was an amendment to the amendment to the amendment, so I apologize. Okay. Yes, the gentleman is recognized for the purpose of an amendment to the amendment.
Kerry Jones from Oklahoma, and what I propose is deleting the language that says shall be ineligible to serve as a member of the Republican National Committee or as a proxy of the member of the National Committee, and insert the language that is and is elected, the Republican National Committee shall disclose such to the Secretary of the Republican National Committee his or her status as a lobbyist in the manner as established to the Secretary. it basically eliminate. I moved to adopt that.
There's a motion. Is there a second? Is there a second? Dies for lack of a second. To what point does the gentleman rise?
Madam Chair, this is Graham Hunt from Washington State, and I would like to move to amend the document as we see now to further define and clarify the paid lobbyist as that is which is defined by a lobbyist for the FEC.
All right. Have you submitted this amendment? Do you have language that we can put up on the board?
I have not. I can run down there.
If you would do that, I would appreciate it.
Thank you.
Is there anyone else who wishes to make an amendment to the amendment?
Request for information, Madam Chair.
Yes, sir.
With an active amendment on the floor, is it out of order for me to move the previous question on the primary amendment?
Well, he did not have an actual motion. It has not been moved and seconded, so there is not a motion on the floor, so previous question would be in order.
Madam Chair, I move the previous question.
It's been moved and seconded that we move to previous question. All of those in favor of closing debate on Amendment 1.1, please say aye. Aye. All those opposed? Nay. All right. All right. The ayes have it. We will now move directly to a vote on Amendment 1.1. All those in favor of adopting Amendment 1.1, please say aye. Aye. All those opposed, please say nay. Nay. The nays have it. All right, I'm going
Madam Chair, point of personal privilege.
Yes, sir.
I rise to raise a question of privilege affecting the Assembly.
Yes, sir. Name and state.
Jordan Ross, Nevada. I cannot be the only person in this room needing a powder room break. I ask for a 10-minute recess.
All right. Before you say 10-minute recess, let me suggest this. All right. We're going to continue tonight after this because of the time that we lost this morning, which is none of your faults, and I'm sorry that we have to do this, but we are nowhere close to completing our task to be done before 5 a.m. on Saturday morning. So here's my suggestion. We do have the sandwiches and the other items that were available that we will now call dinner. It will be an early dinner, but I think it would be appropriate for us to take a 30-minute recess for you to be able to go and get your food. You can bring it back in here, I believe. There's no restrictions on bringing it back. We trust you to clean up after yourself.
One question. I have a point of information that I'd like to ask.
Yes.
Can minority reports be submitted in advance of Monday?
Yes, minority reports will be required. Excuse me. Yes. The only opening for minority reports to be submitted to this body under the current RNC rules is 1 hour, within 1 hour after we have completed our final votes. Not on Monday, but when we have completed our work. It is Monday? I apologize. That's why we have so many people up here to help me. There will be a 1 hour window after we vote on Monday. There will not be an opportunity to pre-submit them. Correct, Mr. Philippi? It's because the minority reports are not possible to be in order until we've actually voted to pass the package as the permanent committee. All right.
Point of information, Madam Chairman, Gwen Bowen.
Yes.
And you may have said this, but I didn't understand it if you said it. We can submit minority reports before Monday?
No, ma'am.
Okay.
No, ma'am. They will not be in order until we have taken our final vote on Monday, and then you will have 1 hour as the opening in which to submit a minority report.
Thank you, Mrs. Chairman.
All right. One other thing I've been asked to announce is the staff is continuing to make amendments or to accept amendments to any of the rules from this point forward. So if you have an amendment that you know you're going to want to make, I would encourage you to come up. You can see how well it's gone on the ones who've been pre-submitted. And so we're going to try to continue to be able to do that. The lady from Hawaii.
Madam Chairman, just a point of information. Many of the RNC members have invited guests here for dinner tonight at the banquet, and they actually have paid and bought tickets to those particular events. I don't know if there's any consideration for that, but I'm
in the same boat as you, Mrs. Hellrank, and
I've invited guests who've spent money on dinner, so I feel a little.
Well, hopefully they can still attend and tell you what a wonderful time was had by all.
They're here in this meeting.
They're here in this meeting. I'm sorry. We are going to have to continue our work, and I would encourage all of the members to stay and complete your work. Any guests, you'll have to make that call on your own. All right. Are there any other questions? Yes.
Eileen Grossman from Rhode Island. I am a guest, even though I'm on the Rules Committee, a guest of C. Frias, and I did pay to go to this event tonight, so I am leaving.
And that is your choice to make. All right. We will stand in recess for 30 minutes.